A slightly late start into the meeting. We've been meeting with a community group from the Regional Health Centre. We'll make a statement about that in a moment too. It was a very good discussion, but we've overrun a little bit. So anyway, here we are. This is the NHS Lancashire Country Integrated Care Board. It's the 1st of February. You're all very welcome. Thank you, folks at the back, for your interest in our business as always. We have a full agenda this morning. Just one apology this morning from James Fleet, the ICB Director of People, who comes as a participant to our meetings but is not able to come today. I'm very pleased to welcome Councillor Michael Green from Lancashire County Council. Mike, as many of you will be aware, Michael has taken on the chairmanship of the Integrated Care Partnership, which we will talk about this morning. I really appreciate, Mike, you being able to come along and join in the discussion. I know you're under time pressure. You're very welcome, Chair. This morning, and we really appreciate you being here. In terms of questions received for this meeting, we have the Widnall Health Centre as a health centre in Chorley. We had 158 questions out of the meeting about what happens next with the Widnall Health Centre. As I said, we've just met with the group. We felt it better to be able to discuss those things outside the formality of our meeting. And colleagues from the Health Centre have expressed their appreciation to us for handling it in that way. We've received 3 other questions for the board, but none relating to the items on the agenda today, so we will respond to those outside of the meeting and then include them as a record of our business. We've a declaration, updated declarations of interest in the papers to receive, and with the minutes of our last meeting on the 7th of December. Are there any comments, questions? Where's David Black? David, I'm sorry, there was a misspelling on your name in the item 6622. I do apologise, it's very rude of us, and we'll make that correction in the proper record. Is there any other questions or points on the minutes from the 7th of December? Okay, can I propose that we adopt those minutes as part of the record? Thank you very much, Roy. Now, we shape the order. We would normally go straight into Kevin's report, but with Michael here, and I wanted us to open up the discussion on the progress that's been made on the integrated care strategy, where we've got to have the opportunity to discuss it. Kevin, do you want to set us up on?
I will say a few words before Michael kicks in, but I guess it relates to my report as well. You know, this balance between dealing with some of the crises we have now, but also setting the strategic direction for the ICB. And I think this is the first strategy for the Integrated Care Partnership. I think we need to just recognise that partnership only came together in September, and we had quite an impossible deadline of producing a draft by December. And there are quite a lot of organisations involved in that, and I think Michael and the team have done a great job in a short space of time. But with that timescale, it was always going to be a bit like touch, and it's probably going to take 3 years to mature in reality. And I guess one of the things, and I know Michael shares this, is the need probably to prioritise a few things in each of the 5 areas going forward is probably the big thing. But I think for the board, it's just to recognise that this is very early days with an impossible time scale, and I think that the parties that have come together work miracles really in short time scales, and there's more work to be done, and it's probably a 3-year journey to get it into the bridge.
Thank you, Kevin. Mike, it'd be great if you could share with the board the process of how you got to here and how yourself with colleagues from the other puppeteer authorities are coming together, and how we're connecting the work from the health and wellbeing boards with this important strategy.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thanks for the opportunity to come and speak this morning and for bringing this item up the agenda. I have to appear before a scrutiny committee at 10:30, so hence my request, but thank you for accommodating that. I'll just keep my opening comments quite brief, and then Craig will come in and take us through the draft strategy. But the integrated care partnership, as Kevin has referred to, was only set up in September. But myself and partners saw it as a real opportunity to start to deliver better joined up services and start to tackle some of the issues that Lancashire and South Cumbria faces, health inequalities, in ensuring that services are not duplicated by different organisations, and to further improve people's health, safety and well-being moving forward. And I saw it as a massive sea change in the way that we could work as local authorities and the NHS and various other partners, and that's very much been the thought right from the beginning. So there's 4 upper tier authorities involved. It's Lancashire County Council, Blackburn with Darwin, Blackpool, that's on the Lancashire side, and then South Cumbria, as most colleagues would probably be aware, are undergoing local government reorganisation at the moment, but South Cumbria are very much a part of this as well. So I first became the Cabinet Member for Health and Wellbeing for Lancashire County Council about 18 months ago now, and then was also appointed as the Chairman of the Health and Wellbeing Board for Lancashire. And we reshaped the Health and Wellbeing Board, just to touch on that. We reshaped that to slim down its membership, very much with the aim of being able to focus on a number of priorities, and I think, as Kevin has alluded to, perhaps a smaller number of priorities, but ones where we could really make a difference. Because I believe if you are going to make a difference, you need that smaller number of priorities. If you have 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 priorities, as you see in some documents, it almost becomes that you don't have any priority at all, and you need a smaller number that you can focus on, besides the other work which obviously goes on in the background. So we did that. We've taken the health and wellbeing out and about as well, so we've got 5 meetings, I believe, since we reshaped it. 4 of those have been out in the community. First one was over in Rossendale, then we went to Morecambe, then we went to Skelmersdale, and last week we had a meeting in Welland. So we wanted to take it away from the county home and get out and about. So that's worked well, but there's still progress to do. Which then leads me on to the Integrated Care Partnership. The idea was it would be chaired by one from the voluntary community and faith sector, which is really important, and we work well together. I think the partners around the table, we've had to face this incredibly difficult task of developing a strategy in a very short period of time, but all the partners came of being able to work in Lancashire and South Cumbria in a much different way, and a way in which they could actually start to improve the health and well-being of our local people. And there was that collective ambition from the beginning to grasp that opportunity to work in different ways and to Draft strategy, Craig's going to take us through that. It is at an early stage. It's by no means a finished article. We've done some initial consultation with the public, and I thank David and Elfwatch in particular for facilitating a lot of that. But it was very light touch, in fairness. We've got a long way to go, and that's the next stage, is actually getting out to communities and getting their views on how we can shape this moving forward. But I'm confident that what we've done up to now
initial draft strategy, which you will all have had sight of in the board papers. There is a very short covering board paper that describes the ICP and its development, but what I wanted to focus on for this discussion is about the integrated care strategy, which is 2023 to 2025. Just in relation to the strategy, I think Councillor Green's alluded to, there is further work to be done, but what we did manage to collect was a significant amount of priorities across the life course that enabled us to start to shape up elements of where communities, partners and our people felt that we needed to prioritise some of our strategic direction going forward as a partnership across health and care, and this very much lends itself to our health and care integration agenda. So this has been cross-referenced against our health and wellbeing boards that have clearly outlined a direction of travel. We've also looked at this with regards to our ICB plan for the future and what's coming out of the NHS. But what we've not got into yet is how we prioritise those different elements of the strategy, what any delivery looks like, and how we need to do further and ongoing engagement to make this a dynamic process that will be iterative, and we'll get to, I would imagine, a very different proposing that we would want to launch properly on behalf of the partnership with the support of Councillor Green. So what I'm mindful of, that there was lots of information within all of the work generated by all of the different groups, so whether it be starting well or ageing well, and we had to distill that. That might not be right for the future of the strategy, but I think it's a starting point for us to do this further inclusive engagement on. So the next part of the programme from this month up until the end of March, we are proposing to do community-led, voluntary sector-led, partner-led engagement, format and the content of it, but also the priorities for it, and then what that might mean for implementation and delivery. So I'm very mindful that there are some sectors that feel that some of the hard work and energy and effort that they put into originally is not necessarily as clear in the document. I think that's at a point in time, and we will address that as a part of the process going forward. There is now a 2-weekly strategy development oversight group where we're looking at revisions of the strategy, we're monitoring the engagement plan, and we'll look at progress reports back to the ICP, but also formal reporting to ICB. So the strategy is here. There's a number of elements that we've already collected comments on. So one of them was, could we put some sunshine on the front paper, because they felt like Lancashire and South Cumbria should be a place with sunshine. I had some comments to say actually that's more reflective of the weather here. So, but there are certain things I think we just need to listen to what people are describing with regards to how we take the next steps forward. So I'm going to pause there because I'm more interested in thoughts and views on the strategy itself and how it's currently shaping up, noting there is a lot being done, but there is a lot to do, and I think that is what I just want to be a take-home message. This strategy will be very different in the next couple of months.
Thank you, Craig. That's very good. So as I say, I would like to take view how it looks from Angie, Abdul, Tracy and John, and then we'll open.
Thank you. So having talked to my local authority colleagues, because I'm here as county council and as the LA rep, I think we would very much reflect on what Michael and Craig have said. That's absolutely the approach that's been taken to developing the strategy. And of course we will, as local authority, develop a mature partnership. I think we recognise that particularly district councils and the BCFS don't feel that their voice has been as effective yet, and that's part of the evolution. So we need to be very focused on that through the next iterations, which again both Michael and Craig have articulated. We're very conscious that the priorities are very broad and they will have to be constrained to meet the resources available to us, and again that's what's been reflected. That's probably going to be the really gritty bit that is going to be really hard and will test the partnership. And then also the communications. Once we've really nailed down the strategy, we need to be thinking about the communications, so refining the vision so it's something that people can recall off the top of their head and articulate. Making sure it's meaningful to all of the partners and in particular to the public so that they understand what it means for them and the services they will get from us as a partnership. So that is where
Thanks, Angie.
the feedback from my colleagues.
Very helpful, thank you very much. Abdul, what do you make of it all?
I think it's great. I'd like to support and echo really Angie's summary there really. From a Blackburn and Diamond perspective, a great start really. It's actually co-aligned really with our health and wellbeing strategy. We're actually refreshing that and taking that back to our health and wellbeing board in March. So there's a great level of alignment really around place and around our local strategy and our work within the authority with our partners. I think in terms of the issues, I suppose the outcomes were mentioned earlier really. I think there's a great deal of intent within the document over a time period. It would be good to get some early early wins in there really in terms of ways of working being different in terms of added value. I think that would be helpful in terms of actually sharing great practice which exists so that we actually then can actually mobilise and further enhance our great collaboration already taking place.
Thank you, that's great. Tracy,
Thanks, David.
thoughts please?
Yeah, I'm in a slightly unique position in that I've been quite heavily involved in the ICP and developing this strategy. Yeah. But I think some of the things that are kind of positives for me are that I think it's created a bit of a framework now in terms of the stages of life that we're all looking at place and saying how do we now structure things so actually it talks to this strategy. So I think that's a really positive thing that's coming out of this, whether that's health and wellbeing boards or place-based partnerships that are looking at that life course and saying we want to align what we're doing at place along those lines. I think one of the things I would have liked to see today is the feedback from the meeting on the 12th of January actually in this strategy for us as a board to review, because I think there was a lot of really positive feedback, but also quite a lot of things that said, let's do this, let's change it, not just the sunshine instead of the clouds. There was quite a lot of other stuff that I would really like to see being fed into this. And also, it plays a little bit to what Angie was saying around how we ensure that all the partners feel that they have a voice within this. And I think a next step for me is a really clear action plan. Craig's already said that there's going to be a lot more consultation. I think we'd all agree that it's absolutely needed because we haven't done, albeit Health Watch have done an amazing job in a very achieved in that very short space of time, but it doesn't do what we need it to do in terms of that wider consultation. And if there's a bit of a call to action in terms of the voluntary sector doing some of this work, we really need to know when, how, where, who, because actually I think that's really crucial to the development of this strategy. But without an action plan, without timescales and an understanding of when all this is going to happen, we probably won't see it happen. And the other thing for me as well is we talked very much about this document being something that can be public facing at some point. We're way off that yet, we understand that, but actually developing some of those infographics so we can keep people informed about what's happening, some of those really great comms tools that we have would be welcome from my point of view, because I think we need that kind of understanding amongst our communities as to what we're doing here and what direction we're going in.
Thanks, Trish. I'll come back to you, Craig, at the end to respond to some of the points that have been made. Just got John.
Thanks, David. Just a couple of things really endorse what everyone said so far, particularly from the kind of adults and children's point of view. It's fine at this stage, it's really good work today, and I think building on what Michael said really is we all take it into our sectors about that message about being clear about what it is and what it isn't and what to do, so that people don't go, is that it? No, actually this is a developing thing, you know. And just as an example of some of the really good work on it, I know that the workshop and the group that worked on it really got into the starting well, that debate around how do you reflect the full breadth of the children's system 0 to 18, whilst at the same time being focused on, you know, really kind of where do we make a real difference. And that was just a good example where, you know, that real focus on 0 to 3, that first 1,000 days, etc., being the answer to that. But behind those 2 pages, there was a lot of really good engagement and work around to get to that. So just really support, and I think as we take it into our agencies sectors, that we're clear about the narrative of it.
Yeah, thanks, John. That's really good. We've got Sarah then Jim.
Yeah, so I support all the comments made, so I won't repeat those. I think mine is linked to what Tracy said at the end. So it was a question around the language, because at times it feels as if it's written with the layperson in mind, and then at other times it feels we've got acronyms in there, and some of the language is really professional language. I suppose my question was, are we going to have a patient-friendly or a resident-friendly version? We may even need a few versions, because we need probably a version that's suitable for children and young people, and then a version that's suitable for different segments of our population. So I think that's really important to do.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks. First of all, it's very assuring that it's becoming real. So it feels like there's something happening, and that's great. I have a couple of points really. One is, I take the points about this as an iterative process, and there's a lot of work going on. But we're saying we're going to have a final strategy by the end of March. How realistic is that? Is that just that still be a high-level view without all the detail? I know the iterative bit is really important, and the consultation bit is really important. But it's also important to get some early wins on this. So we need to deliver some things to prove that this can actually happen, because for years and years we've talked about it and not really done as much as we should have done. So on the one hand we need the early wins, on the other hand we need to go through this consultation process, get this right, which sort of slows it down. And we've got this timetable which is saying the final strategy will be the end of March, which doesn't seem realistic to me.
Yeah, collect all these points, Craig, I'll come back to you. Debbie first.
Thanks. So I had the benefit of working with Councillor Green and being part of the ICP and sort of helping to shape the approach to involvement and engagement. And also the Patient Involvement and Engagement Advisory Committee of the ICB received a really detailed, very thorough report about the approach that had been taken, so that it could offer some assurance or a view to the board around the approach that had been taken. There was some really rich feedback, lots of which had actually been captured in that final sign-off meeting, so I don't think that there was anything new. And I think it was really helpful that Councillor Green set out that it is a developing process. We acknowledge that it wasn't ideal because of the timescales, but that the framework is right, and that involvement and consultation will happen now really quickly and effectively, with a focus on co-production to actually strengthen the document. So some of the feedback that was sort of echoed both in PIAC and also in that last meeting was a real keenness to make sure that that approach around consultation strengthens seldom heard and hard to reach voices, because that's obviously a real challenge. There's been some great work done so far, but there's more that we can do. And partners like HealthWatch, like BCFS, have got a really valuable contribution to making that happen within demanding timescales that I'd hope that we could build on. We also reviewed the detailed feedback, so the report was quite extensive that we had, which meant that we could have a look at what the feedback was and then do a bit of a cross-check and look at the strategy and say, well, people have asked that or they've fed back this, can we actually see how it's moved through into the strategy and see the difference? Lots of examples where we could, but there were some where we didn't find that it had actually happened. So maternity was a great example where there was a huge volume of feedback around services and the need to do things different, better, more joined up, but we couldn't actually quite see that in the final document. So I think as part of this next stage of development, it'd be great to loop back and then just do a bit of the you said we did to make sure that it has translated through. Bearing in mind it's really challenging to get absolutely everything in richness, but where people in volume have told us some really important points, it's important we can see how it translates through to what we're actually doing as a result.
Thanks very much, Debbie. Got Jeff, then I'll come back to you, Craig.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. So yeah, this is I think as good as it could be. I think I'm very happy with. I've been involved in it, and I would endorse it. You know, it does need to develop. So I agree with all that's been said. I think there's a tension between keeping it simple because of the time we had to do it in, and have a small number of priorities, but also maintaining a sense of optimism and ambition, so that we build year by year, so that to me is a real challenge. Not just, I think the document's fine, and I think that there's a thing here about how it's implemented and what the important components of that chain. And I think place and neighbourhood are key in actually. So getting to the next paper in a way, but they're really key to me in actually implementing a lot of this. Yeah. In turn, it's all very well people in place and neighbours saying we're going to do this. But it depends on the workforce to actually embrace the strategy and understand it and agree with it and then try to deliver it. So that is the real challenge for the leadership at place, both you know, including clinical and professional leadership at place. So then that ties in with David's work. So to me, the word integration is key here. It's a health and care partnership proposal, but it depends on place development and clinical leadership development. So we've got to try and align all that together.
Thank you, Jeff. Craig, a number of points we made, particularly one Jim about next steps and timescales.
Yeah, absolutely take the point. So there is a requirement that we have a final draft strategy by the end of March, so that's our aim. However, we do acknowledge that there'll be further work to do within 23-24, so that's why we're looking at this is the initial strategy and doing a lot more of the engagement that I'll come on to in a second, having a final strategy, but then working through that strategy throughout 23 and 24 for a further revision that will obviously take into account a lot more of that detail that you'll be looking for, Jim. So the strategy development group is going to look at a number of components. So one is revisions of the strategy. We're going to build on the engagement to date and do that cross-referencing. So that's a really key component. Picking up the engagement point, absolutely going to build on the strong engagement to date, but we're doing a much more inclusive engagement programme, which is much wider. And then the other is about the versions, so Sarah's point and the infographics. We're going to have a user-friendly version as well as a strategy document, and I do think that will differ depending on whether it's for children, young people, or our ageing community as well. So all of that will be managed within the development group, and we have got quite a tightly managed process with a detailed action plan. We'll be pleased to hear that's coming to our group tomorrow. Vicky Ellaby's done a very detailed programme action plan that is looking at all of those components for us. And I think we did want to bring the comments back from the ICP, but just timing didn't permit us to include them in this document today due to the requirements for board papers. But there are already revisions based on what was a very helpful and detailed set of conversations and discussions at the last ICP. So the revision already looks very different to what we're currently seeing today, and that's a part of that iterative process. So I would like to have the document endorsed today and bring back progress reports, Chair, as you feel appropriate.
Thank you very much, Greg. And thank you again, Michael. So I think that for the communities that we serve, you know, there's always an element of eye rolling when we create new bodies and new ways of working and so on. But I do think that the opportunity that we have now with the exciting stuff under your leadership, Michael, in the integrated care partnership is new and different for us. And as an integrated care board here, then how we align our priorities and delivery programmes with the direction set by the partnership is vitally important. The cross-fertilisation that we've felt today with Debbie and Tracy and Kevin and Jeff and others involved will enable us to be able to follow the strategic lead that you set. So I'm excited about the work that we'll all do together on this, and you've made a great start, and thank you very much for coming to discuss that with us this
Thank you
morning.
for the opportunity to speak to you, and yeah, very happy to come back at any point.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
That's great. Now, if you'll forgive me, we've got a second report which takes us into place-based partnership development, so I'm going to just hold on to that further into the agenda, Craig,
that's
if that's okay. And we'll go straight at this point into your report, Kevin. And as I referenced at the start, we've a formal statement to make about Withnall Health Centre that we need to get onto the record.
I've got copies of the statement for board members actually. I don't know if you could just hand them out. Look, I'll start with the statement on Withnall Health Centre procurement process. As you can imagine, there are lots of legal implications surrounding this process, so we are trying very, we want to be sure-footed in finding the right way forward here. I've received a full briefing on the issue since I came back from leave. I've also reviewed the hundreds of emails, letters and comments made by the general public on the matter, plus a large number of questions directed to the board. I think it was 158 at the last count. We are unable to respond to these just now, but we will do so in the coming weeks. And in the meantime, what I want to be clear on is that we are listening, we are taking the issue very seriously, and the questions raised do deserve full answers. As of today, we have not signed a contract with a provider. I hope to resolve the matters within the next 2 to 3 weeks, and I will keep you informed of developments.
Thank you.
And moving on to my report, the theme, and we touched on it a bit earlier, is really about balancing the need to handle well a series of major crises, yet at the same time not losing sight of the strategic direction and purpose of the ICB. That's why we exist. So if we look at the crises, we have particularly winter pressures, industrial action and finances. On winter, we have been well and truly weighed, we have been measured, but we have not been found wanting. I want to acknowledge that we were under severe pressure and we haven't met many of the service standards that the public would expect, and that's because we are in the face of incredible pressure on the system. Yet, at the same time, I want to praise the system, our providers, our local government partners, primary care, voluntary organisations, private contractors and the ICB staff as well, for responding superbly in the most difficult of situations. So a really big thank you to all of those involved, and special mention to Maggie, who has led our efforts within the ICB, but all the executive team have rolled their sleeves up and got involved, and a large number of staff have been involved in the emergency planning operations, often overnight. So it's been really tough, but I think it showed, and that the cooperation with the system has been amazing. So I think a big thank you to all those involved. We're not out of the woods yet. It is easing a little bit, but it's still pretty tough, and we still have some hurdles to jump going forward. At the same time, we face several days of industrial action, and more is planned. And again, our team and the wider system, I think, have responded to these challenges extremely well. And that has been exceptional because it's been during that winter period as well. The financial year end is approaching. It's been a very tough ask. There remain risks in the finances, but we are optimistic that we will finish the year well and reasonably close to break even. We are going to brief you in part 2 on these matters. The big challenge now, I think we're concerned about, is 23, 24 and beyond. Making sure that our system has sustainable finance and recurrent savings. That's going to be the big challenge, and we're going to start discussing that with you next week when we do our development session. As a new organisation, I think it's vital that we set a comprehensive vision and direction for our system, and over the next couple of months we're going to be doing that. Staff are currently burning the midnight oil on a state of the system review. How well are we doing as a system? We want to make that an annual feature of how we do things around here. Our long-term plan and a 3-year financial framework for the system. You will be asked as a board to sign off the draft documents for the long-term plan and financial framework, I think at our 31st of March meeting, and then we will go through a formal engagement process with all of our partners and come back to you, I think, in June for final sign-off. Really good thing about that is we've got a clear financial framework at the beginning of the year, so everyone's clear. Remember, in the current financial year, that wasn't achieved until the end of July, early August time. So that's a big step forward. All those strategic documents are all about the what, the why, and the how. And we've begun that process today. I don't intend to repeat it with the integrated care partnership strategy. We also have on the strategic front, with Anel's report later, which we can discuss later. That's a significant step forward too. It's all about being really fully aligned as a system on what the vision is and what the key objectives are, so that we can work together efficiently, effectively. So clear on who's doing what. I've said enough here, and I'm very happy to answer any questions if board members have them.
Thank you. I mean, a number of items that Kevin's discussed, we get into deeper in papers in the rest of the agenda around the money and system development and so on. If there are any other points anyone wishes to raise at this time, Kevin, do you want to add anything on terms of the winter and management and how it feels right now, and then Chris?
I mean, just to say, put on record, massive thanks to all of the operational and clinical teams for the work that they've done and the work that they continue to do. I think Kevin's quite right to point out that we're not out of the woods yet. We've still got February, and we know as we go through that half-term period, it's always a pressure point for us, both in terms of activity numbers, but also from a staffing perspective. So there's still a lot of work and preparation to do. But I have to say, the system has pulled together really well. The support through Maggie and the team, centrally through to the operational and clinical teams within the providers, I think has been really well managed. And in addition to that, what we continue to do is also do changes that are going to see us in a better place for the future. So Kevin in his report notes the fall service and the development of the fall service. We've done a lot of work together in terms of trying to develop outside. We really need to focus and continue to focus our energy and attention, because the reality is we haven't got staff to keep increasing capacity within the acute sector. We need to continue the work that we're doing in terms of out of hospital and continue the likes of the virtual wards, the falls, intermediate care, working with local government colleagues. So really pleased with what we've done to date, David, but just a word of caution, there's more to do.
Thank you. And Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo really to what Kevin said, I think there's joint working between youth and mental health colleagues to try and reduce delays as much as possible, recognising there are multiple entry points for mental health. It isn't all through emergency departments and 136 suites. The use of mental health urgent assessment centres has increased, which is positive, but early days, and we need to keep a focus on that. And the additional beds that we'll see open just next week. A reduction on our out of area position.
Thanks. Chris, that's very encouraging. Jeff?
Just a bit of context, please, Chair. So we've got all these problems and we're coping with them. How are we doing compared with others? Is everybody else or better than everyone else? Or is there any area of particular concern that would stand out? Maybe it's the performance report.
You can cover the detail, but I think the general theme would be whether quite achiever. We're missing our targets.
Yeah.
But we're the quiet achiever within the northwest, and some of there are some real severe pressures in the southeast and the southwest, where ambulance handovers and queuing and all that sort of thing is far more challenging than it has been here. So I think in the circumstances, a high performer, but Maggie's got the detail.
Yeah, I feel like I'm being robbed of my report now, so apologies.
Sorry, do it later.
So I do it in cover it in my report, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Then I can give a broader context.
Auntie, did you want to come in?
Yes, please. Just a really quick clarification from Kevin, and thank you to your report. I always find it really helpful, and I do say to my colleagues, if you read nothing, just read this report, because it gives you a good view.
But it is looking at it from an NHS angle. But I'll pick that up and make sure that because we've got a development session next week where we're going to touch on the early stages of this. I'll pick that up with colleagues who are working on this and make sure we have some engagement. So thank you for that.
And Debbie?
Thanks. Slightly different question, if that's okay. So I noted the update around the mutually agreed resignation schemes. I don't want to go into any detail about that because we're in the process of consultation with staff. So my question, Kevin, really is, I suppose I'm acknowledging that it's a difficult time for staff, it's a difficult time for line managers in particular as well, supporting staff. Just to get assurance from you and your team around the communications and whether you feel at the moment that we're doing everything that we can and it's working as well as you would like it to from a comms perspective internally, or whether it's likely to change really. It's that wellbeing approach really.
So I think first of all, I'll just say a few words about, I think the point you've raised first of all is really important to understand that all appreciate that we've gone through all the winter pressure where we've had to really basically take people out there normal jobs and put them into the emergency planning operations. We're still going through restructuring in the organisation. We're working through masking, which is very challenging. So people need to appreciate that. So that's why I'm really thinking about manage our priorities and try to do everything in that context. It is how things going. I think it's been challenging with all that in mind. We are going to get more headcount reduction targets. We're not quite sure what it's going to look like from NHS England in due course. And we are going to get more staff from specialists in commissioning coming down to the ICP. And I think we'll probably have some big challenges in that space where we'll have responsibilities without all of the staff and with some sizable savings targets as well. But I think morale is not where it needs to be. I think communications is not where it needs to be either. So I think work in progress, we've got a lot of work to do in that space. And as an exec team, I think we would all acknowledge that it's not where it needs to be. It is a difficult time, you know, but I think there's a lot we could be doing better as well. So yeah, I think room for improvement would be the honest answer. And I think that will be reflected in the staff survey, which we're about to get the headline results from as well. You know, it's not going to make great reading. And probably the trick here is to be really open about that, and then to focus on a few obvious areas around internal communications in particular, and training and development of our workforce going forward. Yeah.
And Jane, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've been talking to James recently about leadership and organisational development. One thing that strikes me about this and the strategy paper is about how to turn a crisis into an opportunity for learning and thinking differently. But it's very easy, isn't it, to kind of get through the crisis and move on and carry on doing it the way you always did it. So I wonder whether there's an opportunity here to think about building kind of learning and review and evaluation into what's happening with an encouragement to think system-wide. You know, and it's this point that Angie's making about we now need to think differently about how we're working with integrated care. And I think for me, something about feeding these kind of lessons learned from some of the operational pressures through to the strategy. So we've got a real-time learning loop, and it's not a static document that we create and put on the shelf for 2 years, but it's something that actually does get reviewed and updated. So I'd really welcome a kind of some thoughts about that strategy, the review and evaluation piece that links with the wider kind of learning from the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So absolutely agree, Jane. Part of the discussion we're having tomorrow is about how we start to evaluate as we go. So we're very clear on we need to have some measures of success so we can understand, but as a part of that iterative process, we do want to take the learning. You know, people have talked about the learning from COVID in Lancashire and South Cymru, really important. I think there's huge amounts of learning from what we've just been through industrial action. But I was talking to Jeff earlier, there is lots of work already happening at place in an integrated way, and we're building the scaffolding around that for some of the structural input that we need to layer in, but actually some of the work that we want to do needs to be brought to the surface and shared across multiple partnerships and multiple places. So I think what you've described there is something we could have a conversation outside of board. I think that'd be really helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Just to say, I know you started your comment, Jane, about leadership development, and James here, of course he isn't, but I picked up that very conversation with him yesterday, and I think there is something about the system giving a bit of thought to what leadership looks like in terms of system leadership as opposed to organisational leadership. Yeah. I think that's something we need to think about and scope it out and then deliver over a period of time. Yeah.
Thanks, Lee. Very good. Okay, thank you, Kevin. Let's move on to item 8. Patient story systems.
It is. So I believe we're going to have a video in a moment or two on virtual wards. We've heard a lot about them. And in fact, Kevin McGee was just talking about capacity outside. And before it comes from it, so just a quick introduction. So virtual wards, new model of care, I've talked about it a little bit at the board in the past. It means that patients are cared for at home rather than in the hospital. It's a very new model of care. It's been done by working with primary care, with secondary care, with the ICB, all working collaboratively together to ensure we can do this safely. And in Access South Cumbria, I would say we started off from a fairly low baseline, apart from East Lancashire. And we have established through a kind of working together, making sure we get the hearts and minds and the policies correct to enable us to do this safely. We have about 180 beds now open, and the vast majority of them are utilised, unlike some other ICBs. We focus on people with chest conditions and frailty at the moment, and we intend to expand out towards end-of-life care as well, and maybe eating conditions, particularly for children. But we have to do it safely. But you'll hear what it means for the patient at the moment, and we've got a really good patient story coming up. That 180 beds we hope to move to 750. And the final thing today is we shared some of our experience with the national team and across other ICBs last week And there was an immediate response, please can we have your policies, because we want to see how you do it. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to let the patient speak now.
Thank you.
Fingers crossed.
Well, I didn't really understand the meaning of a virtual ward until it was explained to me by a member of the respiratory team, that I would be able to be monitored, you know, from my own home and sleep in my own bed, which was a bonus, really, when you're not feeling, you know, very well. You felt safe, I think, because you knew that, you know, somebody was following me up. It's not as if you wouldn't want to, oh, well, in 3 days we'll ring you and look at how you're going on. It was going to be a daily until you thought that, you know, I was well enough not to be monitored. You give me the oximeter, didn't you? And you were ringing me at 9:30 each morning, and I was doing my levels, you know, I'd take my temperature and things like that. Once I got a number to ring, you know, at least I knew that I could contact somebody if I didn't feel well enough. Well, when I had to have a prescription, I couldn't fault the system at all, because I think it was within at our home within 2 hours. So that really, I didn't have to go anywhere, and it was delivered to the door. So that was a very positive, when you're not feeling well, having to go out and get that prescription. You know, if I had to go to the doctor's or the pharmacy for it, that saved me. We were fortunate that we had a disabled badge, but if you have to come back, you know, as I had to do for a couple of visits, what about, you know, like parking, you know, fees? You would have to pay those. It would have been easier sort of to stay at home instead of having to come back into SDEC for the blood tests and, you know, the nebulizer, things like that, if it could be done in your own home. And you're not possibly going out, you know, meeting other people within the hospital. You don't know what other things you could catch, you know, when you're not well. And I suppose if you could have a team that came out to you, that would be far better than having to come back into the hospital. I don't think it put any extra stress on, you know, my husband at all. I think it was more positive because I was at home. He wasn't having to come into hospital each day, you know, like to visit. Now that visiting is open, that you can come into a ward. So I think it was a more positive thing for us, yeah. But it might not be for everyone. You know, they may not have a support network around them. And I suppose it's up to the hospital who decides who goes on the virtual pathway. I can't thank, you know, everyone who's on that, the respiratory team, everyone that has been involved in it, because I think it helps you recover better when you're at home. I know you have the backup in a hospital, but you also have the backup that, you know, we could ring someone, or you were ringing us. So if anything was wrong, then, you know, we could come in and see someone. It wasn't like you were isolated or anything like that. I think it was a really positive thing and a wonderful way forward. I would definitely recommend the virtual ward to a patient in my situation, definitely.
understand the money and how much real money is actually coming to us. But I think the virtual ward model is something that we've developed across the ICB. We have this ambition to get to 750 next year. But if there's additional money and resources, and if we can think about doing things differently as well, because you know, there must be better ways of doing it, and we're always open to improvements. We could potentially escalate that number to a higher number in future years. You know, it's very patient, it's a patient-orientated way of managing these conditions. I wouldn't want to be in a hospital if I could get away with it. So it's a really good model. We've built some foundations, and now let's see how ambitious we can be.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David. Just building on the point, David, you mentioned the announcement this week, and that specifically references expanding out of hospital care and underlines the use of virtual wards. And if you listen to the patient, she described ringing up and telling the vital signs to the person at the end of the phone. Technology can be used to make this even better. Yeah? And we've got a lot of national models and models within Lancashire and South Cumbria that are using technology-enabled virtual care. So for example, in Blackpool Teaching Hospital, they just started the cardiac pathway, and it's one of the first in the country where people on the cardiac waiting list have telemonitoring solutions where it's alerting a central monitoring hub, and that allows that prioritisation and extra additional support. So, and I think it answers part of your question, David. If we use technology, we then can start looking at some of the workforce challenges as well, and some of the reports we read. You can monitor 600 sort of people with one nurse because you've got that alert technology sort of responding to you. So there's a number of things I think we can definitely proceed with this from a technology perspective. So coupling the technology and the face-to-face provision.
Thanks, Asim. Jim, please.
Yeah, intuitively this sounds great. From a patient's experience perspective, I'm sure it's much better. But from a safety perspective, how are we evaluating this, just to make sure that the clinical outcomes are no different from people on a virtual ward to have they been visiting hospital or whatever it might be? So that there needs to be some sort of almost triangulation to make sure that there's no loss of quality in this.
So we have commissioned an evaluation, which is going to be undertaken by the Academic Health Science Network. In fact, all 42 ICBs are undertaking an evaluation as well. But although we have started this work this year, a number of other healthcare systems started a year or two earlier. But what you can see is it evaluates very well for the patients. And I think if we'd actually seen that the outcomes were poorer, we would have picked it up much sooner. There are quite a lot of patients who've been through these services, particularly in the south of the country. We do need to evaluate it, but I think this is actually and I hope so, this is actually a less expensive way of managing the patient in a better way. That's what it is, and I think there's so many wins in this. But we will be formulating, formally evaluating.
It'd be good for us to have some of that back here, David. So Jeff and Sarah, please.
Yeah, I'm not really understanding the detail behind this. So forgive me if I say this and then it's all covered, but GPs will want to know there's a very clear pathway how to use this, so that they don't pick up a phone and someone says, no, try the hospital. Then the hospital says, no, try the virtual ward. There has to be a single route in, and somebody directing the traffic, so that that's safe and effective for the patients and the clinicians. So I guess that's covered, but I'll just make that point. So it'll be key.
And you're quite right. So it's key in the policies. It's very much led by the providers at the moment in the hospital setting.
Yeah.
But that means that and there's a number of models. This lady here she arrived at the A&E and was then sent home, okay, into the virtual ward. So there's that admission avoidance, for example. But it's also used as a step down. So you've been in hospital, you're beginning to improve. Can you go into the virtual ward so you're discharged early rather than staying in? So there are various models that are being used by different providers.
Or we may be able to keep someone at home if we know they can have a virtual bed. But we just need that clear pathway and no blockages.
Thanks, Chair. Sarah?
I just wanted to respond a bit further to Jim's question about assurance around safety for patients. I think it's really important to understand that they are still under that specialist team, so even though they're not in a bed on a ward, they are actually still under the care of that trust and that specialist team. So if there was any incidents or any harm, or something didn't work, like that would be logged and recorded by staff, just the way an incident on a ward would be logged and recorded, or just the way our community teams who have got patients all the time that they're looking after at home. So and actually, in some ways, because of the monitors they get because they're at home, in some ways, some of these examples are probably having more monitoring going on than if they were sat in a hospital bed where they might not have an oximeter on all the time, or they might not always have a machine. So I think as well as the formal evaluation of the programme, the systems and processes that would be in place within a hospital setting are in place for the patients on the virtual. The clinical responsibility remains for, in that case, the respiratory team.
I accept all that. It's just if the patient was to deteriorate, that patient would not be in as good a place at home as they may well have been if they were in hospital. Which is why it needs to be a proper evaluation, and it needs to not just be a short-term evaluation. It needs to be, over a number of years, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. Although if they start to deteriorate at home, so I've give an example where I know somebody on a virtual ward, they started to deteriorate, and then very quickly the team, they went into hospital and they were admitted, and actually because they're under the team, they actually save the need to go through A&E and be reassessed and all of that. They go straight into a bed under that specialist team, because in a way it's like thinking about it almost as an extra ward or extra beds for that ward, but they're actually out in the community rather than being an extension of the hospital.
And Roy?
Thanks, David. Can I just say that's one of the best patient stories I've seen, I think, on this book so far. I thought that the lady articulated the benefits of that particular process really well. And just following on, I think, from Jim's point and Sarah's comments, I think it's right that we have that evaluation process and ensure that this particular benefit is well understood, and that we can actually ensure that the patients are receiving the care that they receive in hospital, similar to the care they would, receiving the care at home that was similar to receiving in hospital. I mean, the point I was going to make, Chairman, was about the Nexus project, which was a Blackpool project originally, and that drilled down into each of the wards so that people could see, including GPs, could see where their patients were on the wards, and actually identified individual beds and individual patients and where they were up to in their point of care. So I know it's on the ICB website about the Nexus project, which I would really recommend, because it's a really good and innovative scheme. Well, not scheme, it is a process. Yeah, I do support this. Just one sort of anecdotal comment from me is when I left my role at the CCG, I had to go back to my office a couple of weeks later to pick up some paperwork, and somebody had used it as a storeroom for oximeters, and it was just full of, and I had to climb in to get through all the oximeters. So there you go.
There's a message in that.
There is. Yeah. What use is it? Yeah, that's absolutely. Thank you, David.
I've got Tracy there, Maggie, please.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I agree with you, Roy. I think it was a pleasure to listen to that lady. I think it was a really good story she told us. One thing that really stood out for me was when she said, it's really worked for me, but it isn't for everybody. And I just wondered if we do have any data, because both David and Sarah have talked about it's working for patients. Do we understand which patients it's working for? Do we have any further feedback around, because I think she talked about the social networks, and the networks, she was very articulate, wasn't she, when she said it. What about people who are very isolated? I'd love to understand how it works, if it's working for some of the more vulnerable people in our communities who are clearly those people who often need more care, and the data around the kind of quality is absolutely vital, but to me also is some wider understanding of patient feedback, I think.
Certainly within what we did when we started off on our journey, we actually brought the trust together, and particularly their respiratory and frailty teams, and we developed a common protocol for that exercise rather than doing it 4 times, we did it once. But you're right, that it will not be, it was a telling point in there, I've seen this video more than once. It's not right for everyone, so there will be people who, well, simple things, stay off home. You know, and can you, who's at home with you, which is always a very key question. And if you are by yourself, can you actually manage to carry out processes such as checking your oxygen levels, taking your antibiotics? Can you care for yourself at home, or do you need to be in hospital? So there's clear criteria laid down. Again, I mean, we do meet every week as a virtual ward, and maybe I just need to ask your question, but we're not getting any adverse reports coming back to us, but you know, people they're getting, in fact, the most interesting thing, the greatest challenge we've had is getting the doctors to think it's safe. Because the doctors think, well, if I can't see you and you're not my ward, how can you possibly be safe? Well, the fact is that doctor's not on the ward 24 hours a day. And the fact is that patients prefer sometimes to be at home with them. So the biggest challenge has been the doctors, and as we build up that confidence, we've actually started doing very conservative work. I'll see what else we can get.
Maggie Darcy.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this all day. It's a really important initiative, and I think it's really nice to hear this conversation. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things. Jim's point as well around, you know, it'd be riskier to be at home than it is in a hospital. I know from very recent experiences, chief exec, one of the saddest types of complaint, and I'm sure Kevin, you will see this as well. One of the saddest complaints you see is when a family or a patient will complain and say, why was my relative on X ward and they deteriorated under your nose and nobody did anything? And when you do the root cause analysis of that, you'll find that the patient is assessed and will have a stable early warning score, and they will deteriorate rapidly. And so it's not always the safer option. The evaluations that have been going on now within the virtual ward, which with the precursor was technology-enabled care, is actually, across the country, there is a depth of material from those evaluations which is feeding in to the National Virtual Ward Initiative. And it is showing us some really stark things around the improvements and the life expectancy of patients shifting in some of the frailty modalities. Now, we will not be able to talk about that in 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. It will take several years, but the longitudinal studies that have been in place now around technology and a shift. We discharge hundreds of patients every day who are frail, who are medically fit for discharge, but they remain frail. The absolute robustness around the criteria for being on one of these wards is amazing, and we can't do it justice in this little session, even though the video was great. Anybody who has got an interest to see a little bit more, I know colleagues in our acutes would be delighted to give anybody a broader insight, because they're really proud about the outcomes that they're seeing through this work. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. So ask him then, ask Kevin to.
Thank you, Chair. I think just on Tracy's point, there's a lot of data we do collect around and the feedback of our patients. So there's eligibility criteria, and then if somebody doesn't want to go onto this specific pathway, then there will be a reason why they don't want to go onto that pathway. So I've got something in front of me where there's reasons like technology, anxiety, they feel it's not the right thing for them. And then there's a feedback loop as well, but that will feed into different approaches. And just to reiterate Maggie's point, in the paper that was published earlier this week from the Department of Health and Social Care, that talks about the increasing clinical evidence on how these pathways are safe and effective as well. So I think there might be some national evidence that we can also call upon.
Thanks, Assi. Kevin?
Yeah, and they're all really good points raised by colleagues and a really good debate. I have to say that from an acute perspective, I suspect there was a degree of scepticism 18 months, 12 months ago in terms of the concept of virtual ward. That was primarily, I think, as David has said, from the clinical teams. I don't see that now within the acute sector. I see clinical teams wanting to engage, respiratory teams wanting to engage and support the development of virtual wards. Absolutely, we've got to collect the data, and it will take some time to do so and to prove the issues. But we're not seeing rafts of complaints, we're not seeing rafts of safety issues coming into the acute, which we would if there was concerns. So I think this is a model of care that I think we need to embrace as a system. It will certainly help through winter pressures, and it will certainly help clinical teams and flow through our system. So I think it is something we will embrace. It's something that the clinical teams are starting to support. And I am very optimistic it will be part of the solution for the long-term winter pressures that we're seeing at the moment.
Thank you, Ken. And Kevin trailed earlier in his report about the strategic focus and plans that we'll discuss over the next period, and these new ways of working and developing ways of working will be central to that. I don't know if others did. I was smiling. I tuned into a programme on Monday evening that I don't normally tune into, and the journalist was Angela Rippon, attending Finney House in Preston, talking about different models of going. If I said the item concluded with Kevin and Angela Rippon dancing down the corridor in Finney House, it would be an exaggeration, but only a slight. Thank you, David. It was very, very good discussion, and the things that we'll pick up.
Excuse us. Public engagement, we don't feel very skilled for moments. Thank you.
Right. Now, we move on to item 9, which is the operating model for the ICB and the PCB, and Ruth Cornell's report, and then we're sort of on the theme of how the system's developing. After that discussion, Greg, I'll come back to you to talk about your integration and update around places and stuff. So let's take item 9 now.
Yeah, perhaps if I do an introduction and hand over to Kevin. Yeah. I think you've already had a briefing with Ruth, so don't want to go through the detail. I think we warmly welcome the report. Very pleased with the high level of participation of leaders across the system in the work, support of the direction of travel and the recommendations. And I know from the meeting we had with chairs and chief executives across the trust before Christmas, there's a lot of support. It was unanimous when we met. This is all about who does what, and it's about equipping our system to hit the ground running at pace, to do things faster, better, smarter and cheaper. And I think what Kevin and I have been discussing is developing a joint response to this to make it real in terms of the 7 or 8 priority projects, who's going to be doing what resources do we need to make them happen, doing it jointly. So we're talking about a joint transformation team across the whole system. That's the sort of tenor of this, really. And I think it's a great opportunity to we know that we've stumbled on a couple of projects. That's been a good learning point. I think we had a good discussion pre-Christmas on what the lessons were from that, and I was very heartened by the openness, the lack of defensiveness, and the good relationships in place. So I think this is a great opportunity to reset it and move forward at pace. Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose the first thing to say is the report itself has not been through the provider collaborative board yet, so any comments to make, I'm making on a personal basis. But it is fair to say that the provider collaborative board was very supportive of this piece of work, because it was important in terms of setting that operating framework and setting rules of engagement. So the concept and the work absolutely supported. I am personally pleased with the report that Ruth's done. I think she's captured the essence of the conversations that we had before Christmas between ICB and PCB colleagues. There's some clear recommendations in there about how do we move forward and how we work together. We will take this next week through to the PCB for formal sign-off and endorsements. And very, really want to work now with Kevin and colleagues in terms of producing a very detailed action plan behind this that will set that framework for how we work together. We've got some really important work that the ICP, the PCB needs to do, and I think this will be very helpful in setting the framework. So very supportive.
Thank you. Chris,
No, nothing. Absolutely fully support.
Any questions, thoughts? Please, Sheena, interested in your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it's a really, really good piece of work, and I think it has really helped this translation piece. So, you know, we've talked to them a lot this morning about, okay, so the principles about how we're going to work are really important, and then it's the bridging into how we can translate and transact and make that difference that we all want to see for our population. So I think this is a really important piece of that, and I think it's really helpful, Dave, as well, that we think next about that link into wider integration piece. But if we don't get this work right with how providers work and operate, and how we're that clarity about who's doing what, and you know how that's helped, how do we hold each other to account, then I don't think we can move forward as effectively as we could do. So I think it's a really important piece in this whole bit about how we're going to move forward as an ICB to see that translation and transaction of that what we want to do. So I really welcome it. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Roy, Jeff, Tracy, Jim.
Thanks, David. Just to agree with the comments that Sheena's just made as well. Also, in the report, it just refers to the PCB focusing on a few significant priorities which have a high impact, which clearly we'd all obviously agree with. And those priorities should have a programme approach, and we've talked about programme approaches in the board before, and we talked about it actually in the Finance Committee a couple of weeks ago about that approach, and an SRO being held to account actually for each of those programmes of work. I think that's really vital actually, really important for us to be assured as a board that each of those programmes are being delivered to the specifications I think that the board will be deciding on. But of course, working with the PCB, I think the ICB, it goes on to say the ICB should lead on determining those priorities and also setting them in a collaborative way. Absolutely, totally agree with that point as well. So there's a lot to be agreed with and supported within this particular document, but also to agree with Sheena's comments about us being able to come back to this. It's a living document, clearly. You know, it's going to come back to us, I think, in time when it's been refined and you know with more points I think put into it, and as it's put together by the people who've worked on it. So the 8 priorities for the joint effort that I looked at 4.52, they're identified within the document. You can't agree with any of those, but I remember at 2 there, it's about clinical service redesign and talking about vascular. And I worked on a programme some years ago now with Jim Gardner, who some of you will know, who was, and Jim was actually involved in that vascular redesign, and quite frankly, it didn't happen. So I think we need to be absolutely clear that some of these things really need to happen. We've talked about clinical redesign in this board before, and you know, between ourselves in meetings, and I think it's really important that we ensure that these priorities are kept and that they are, I suppose, in a way that we have the way that we understand. I think that how that will be met in a timely way. I'm not sure how we would do that, but if you have, you know, you have 8 priorities there. But as I think we said before, if you have more, you know, lots of priorities, you have no priorities. I just want to be assured, I think, as a board member here, that you know, when we actually identify those priorities, they will be met and in a timely manner.
Thanks, Roy. Kevin, I'll come back to you towards the end to pick up points that Roy and colleagues will make. So I've got Jeff and Tracy, the next 2.
So thank you, Chair. So I like this paper and I understand that, and that's good. That's not not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is, well, this is part of a system, and I really think there's the next steps about how this impacts on place development, how this impacts on primary care. So it forms into the system integration stuff. Great. And so I'd like to be able to cross-reference what everything's said in here with place-based directors, with some leaders from primary care, say, how do you see it acting on you, have you got any refinements before we sign something up in the future. Because it's an important piece. What we just heard from David about on that patient story about virtual wards, that's a critical example that's going to be delivered in places, it's going to affect primary care. So it's just about stitching that all together. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just about cross-referencing it and seeing how people feel about it in other places.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jeff, and it's an important responsibility for us in this board to make sure that all those
all
connections are together. Yeah. Tracy, please.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I think, you know, in complete agreement about developing an operating model and coming together. Not an easy process, so all my hands up to you in terms of where we've got to with this. I hope this lands in the right way, but I think I take a slightly different perspective on this, and I started reading this paper and felt quite positive about the framing around kind of health inequalities. But questions for me are where were the other system partners in this? Because I think I can speak on behalf of the BCFSE, but I noticed local government are not there, primary care are not there. The list of people who were interviewed really screams to me that it was very much an NHS process. And I suppose, looking at it from my perspective, I just feel a little bit like we're back there again with the NHS trying to solve problems that the NHS can't solve alone. So I'm sorry if that sounds really critical, but that is definitely something I'm seeing again. And I think that when we talk about the next steps, I'm hearing that the system as a whole will be involved. But I think certainly what I've been saying on behalf of my sector is, can we please be involved at the start of the process? And I've seen the process really develop where we haven't been. And the other thing again about kind of those structural inequalities and the importance of that, it really kind of brought home to me when I looked at the priorities, and we've got vascular, as Roy's talked about, and stroke. And you know, some of the work that I've been doing recently, one of the things that's been really highlighted through the Core 2025 work is, you know, 30% of kind of when we look at our kind of population, people with high blood pressure in deprived communities, it's 30% higher. So if we're talking about stroke and we're talking about cardiovascular and all of the things that we want to change, if we're not then bringing in those structural inequalities, then I think we as a sector really talk to, I think local government also bring in lots of those perspectives. And I think we're not doing what you said right at the top of your report, Kevin, which is a fully aligned system. And it's kind of a plea from me, I suppose, as we go forward to really integrate as a whole system, because I think that's where the transformation will happen. So I didn't want to sound incredibly critical, because I understand that it's a really difficult and challenging process, especially when we've got a provider collaborative that is coming together in a different way, and there's lots of kind of new ways of working that are not bedded down yet. But I would have really liked to have seen some people on that list of interviews that came with that wider perspective.
Yeah, but completely take the points, Tracy, and think about it. And it leads us in nicely to some of the issues we'll discuss about place development as well, thinking how the different bits come together. I've got Jim, Ibby, Jane.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, my comment is perhaps more pragmatic in a sense. Ruth Carnell's report highlighted the importance of clinical leadership, and I think nothing will happen unless we get clinical leadership aligned to this. And there's a sort of here and now issue about short-term getting clinical leaders in place. There's a longer-term programme about developing clinical leadership across the patch. I don't think it falls just to the primary collaborative board, provider collaborative board, but it's for the whole system to develop this. But it's really important. Nothing happens unless the doctors agree with these things. And I think, you know, Roy talked about vascular services. Had the doctors been on board with that, it would have happened. They weren't, so it didn't. And, you know, I've got scars and bruises all over my body from trying to push things through and doctors preventing them happening. So we've got to get doctors aligned with this. And it seems to be almost a key priority for us as an ICB. We've got broader ICS responsibilities, I realise, but in terms of if we want to move the ICB agenda forward, it feels like we've got to crack this thing about clinical leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. David, I'll come back to you in a bit. Ibby next, please.
Yeah, thanks, David. I've had the benefit of being on the provider collaborative board for 3 years, so kind of got good insight into it, but also the benefit of seeing it from the provider perspective in terms of long-term teaching initiatives. So I think Jim's point is absolutely critical. Clinical leadership bit is central to driving some of this clinical configuration, and leadership from the front will really matter here. The other bit is, I don't think we should underestimate the role of the boards in this, and we should also kind of always be mindful of where boards are. So whilst of course we've got clinical leadership, on things like shared corporate service and rationalisation, I think we need to make sure the boards are with us as well on that kind of journey. We need to give that a bit of thought going forward too in terms of what we're pushing about our ethics. Yeah.
Thanks, Ibby. It's very helpful. Jane, please.
Thank you, Chair. In a way, it speaks a little bit to Tracy's point, because I think this is a really important piece of work, because people need to know how this all fits together, and unless they've got that kind of security, it can make barriers get in the way of things. One of the recommendations that came out of this was that essentially the PCB oversees a number of programmes almost on behalf of the ICB. And I was drawn to that recommendation rather than some kind of subsidiary structure or whatever. The idea of programmes of work seems to be quite a compelling one. But I suppose the danger in that is that those programmes which are overseas then become a kind of NHS provider focused sort of programme, and we lose the wider system thinking and the integration of our partners. Now I raised this as part of the consultation about this, and apparently in other areas there's an encouragement that the PCB takes a leadership role, but not just a pure delivery role. So if you're looking at something around workforce and whatever, then the PCB would lead on that programme, engage with wider system partners, rather than just seeing itself as a delivery partner for that programme of work. And that sort of subtle understanding of how that delegation works, essentially, might help to start and create that, so we don't lose the integration, we don't lose the wider thinking. It is subtle, but I think it's really important that we do.
Yeah, thank you. Collect up these points together now. Sarah, please, and then David.
I just wanted to comment, I suppose, on Jeff's comment and reflecting, and I'm kind of going to take us back a little bit to the comments that Jane and Ibby made earlier about system leadership. So in some ways, we're almost chunking things up here. So Jeff was saying, well, the provider collaborative can't do it without primary care or place, and I suppose I want to remind us all is that actually place is the linchpin here, because all of those providers are also, should be, a member of a place-based partnership. Primary care isn't a separate entity at place, it's part of the place-based partnership, as are voluntary sector and community sectors, the population. So, in really my reflection was that the legislation in a way has made things much more complicated than it was before. Under the old legislation, you could chunk the system up, particularly in health, you're either in commissioning or you're in provision. Now it's much more blurred, so I think even though I understand the comments about why more people included, I think there was a really urgent and important piece of work to do, which is linked to this around the clarity, because actually I think the danger was that the provider collaborative was in a way becoming bigger than that. So I probably have a slightly different view to Jane, because I think if you led the thinking behind provider collaborative, it was really what are the one or two key things that a collaboration of trust could maybe do better together than having 4 or 5 trust times to do separately. So things like elective recovery is a really good example of that actually combining that resource across the population, you may get more of the population not waiting as long. Whereas I think the bigger things, the really important things, I think you're alluding to Tracy, what our strategy is about, that wider population health work, that for me is for place to do in true partnership, in a true integrated way, and every provider should be and is a member of those place-based partnerships. But all of this, going back to the leadership points, requires a really different way of working and behaving and thinking from all of us and leaders at every level. and actually it's a shame James isn't here today, but you know, there are already workshops planned around the system, around system leadership and how we work, and there's a big ask of lots of us to put to one side organisational allegiances, provide collaborative allegiances, and actually really think about what we do and how do we work together in the best way for the population and those outcomes. But I actually, if we hadn't have had that first stage with the provider collaborative and tease out some of the things we needed to tease out, it would probably be harder to move forward on that integration agenda and place-based partnerships.
Thank you, sir. David.
Thank you. So building on what Sarah said, I mean, Ruth Carnell's report, much of the scope was around how we as the ICB work with the provider collaborative. That's what it was about. And I think Roy's point, I think it was about vascular. The fact is it was never taken forward. You could add head and neck, urology, specialist services. Pathology is an issue where we've not managed to move to a single network. And we do need to do it together. This is not about the PCB and the ICB. This is about together, working together. What do we get the best? How do we get the best? And it's really around partnership working. But that's what we need to do, work in a partnership. They've got resources, we've got resources. Let's do it together and get the best deal for our population. That's the bottom line. We have lots, and if you think back to the cancer report last board, we described services that were not resilient. And we can't accept that. We've got to have resilient services. That's why I need to work with Kevin and his chief executive colleagues in order to ensure we get the best possible deal. So I've spoken to the medical directors since we had the cancer report at the last board. We talked about partnership working, that it would be times that we as commissioners would have to make difficult decisions because it's apparent that it can look like two trusts are vying with each other for a service. We've got to think what's the best deal for the population. You're right, we need to pick a few priorities. We need to have a common narrative, and we need to make some changes this year. And that is something that I've shown the medical directors, and having spoken to the chief executives and some others at their providers of collaborative board in common, there's an agreed common way forward there.
Thanks, David. It's very good summary. David and Angie.
I think Angie, you
You go first.
I guess I just want to build on Tracy's point really, and I mean, you know, fully understand and accept where this paper's going, and it makes perfect sense. But I've got a slight worry, which is that we're doing things to people and not with people. So you know, Tracy's describing there the wider sector not being involved in some of the decisions, but equally, I can't see much evidence that people are involved. And you know, we've talked there about working in true partnership, and I agree that's the right way. But we must work in partnership with our population. And you'll remember the white paper, Volume People, 20 years or so ago, and it had the slogan, nothing about us without us. And I've got a slight sense that there's almost there's a danger of us being in a darkened room making decisions on behalf of people or for people. And we've just got to make sure that we've got a really robust engagement plan that sits right alongside all of this work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So, firstly, I'll just endorse and amplify David and Tracy's comments. I won't repeat them. A couple of things which I thought were perhaps not obvious to me that I thought should have been in the commentary. And Sarah's comments were really helpful, so it may be that they're not really so much about collaboration. But the two things that I might have expected to see come through more coherently is something about basic standards in the providers area. So we get, and we do this in local government, we get very attracted to the big sexy schemes and we forget the basics, which are always our undoing. So where's that focus on getting the basics right about infection control, hydration, all of those sorts of things? I'm sure Sarah has covered, but it felt to me that there should have been something on that. And the other thing comes back to the leadership point. I think we talk a lot now about system leadership and we forget our personal responsibilities and our personal leadership. And there is something for me, I think the NHS, I've got the NHS now, it's very close to Whitehall and Westminster in terms of culture and behaviours. And we might want to be thinking about how our personal leadership styles across and within the system actually drive more confident, gravitas and engaging leadership. Because I think sometimes we lose that sense of measured leadership commentary, and I think that is something essential in a system which is under such challenges that the NHS is under. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin.
Yeah, quite a wide-ranging range of comments. How can I bring this together? I think the first thing to say is we deliberately narrowed the scope on this right down. We were not trying to boil the ocean and look at the whole system. There is a parallel piece of work which we'll talk about shortly by Sir David Pearson on place. It's really important, but it's at a much more immature stage. We probably will need to do something like this in the place area in due course as well. So this was just looking at a small part of the overall system, but a critical part in terms of what we need to do in the next few years to put the money in the right place in our system, to unlock some of the opportunities that are in by getting the providers to work together on key areas. There's some major things, and we've been talking about things like banking agency and common platform. And to do that, we need to understand who's doing what and have clarity there, otherwise it won't work. So it was a really narrow focus about the bureaucracy and how it can work well in relation to the ICB and the PCB. So I acknowledge the importance of place. If we get this right, it will help provide some of the funding for investment that's needed in that sector going forward. So that's really important. But the point I'm trying to make, it was narrow, not broad, and deliberately so to deal with current issues that we discussed at this board. So I think it's really important to understand that. I think the second thing to say is there is a parallel piece of work in the place area, and it will probably need something like this sort of exercise when it's maturing a bit more than it is at the moment. Third thing to say is the section on the priorities in section in 4.52. I'm expecting that to feature in our long-term plan. What are the outcomes? What are the savings around a range of areas which are to do with the provider collaborative, but also in the community space too. And we will take that forward with you, and that will feature in our development session next week. But the key point here was narrow, not broad, acknowledge all of the issues around the broader system. We're obviously, that's going to be critical for the ICB to get that right, but this was just looking at a part of it, not trying to deal with a whole bunch of other issues.
Thank you. Good, good discussion. Good report, and I think it helps us move forward in terms of certainly the significant and central role that PCB takes in the context that everybody's described. Craig, leads in nicely to talk about the paper on integration and where we're at with places.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take it you've read the paper. Just to orientate to the paper, it's in two parts. One is about the Integrated Care Board's health and care integration function, and just a little bit about the portfolio since my arrival and our priorities. But I think the second part that I want to focus on the most is about place development, and we've heard a lot about that other piece of the jigsaw today, whether it be related to the partnership, the strategy, or the discussion we've just had about PCB. So with regards to the team itself, we are supporting, as you've heard, the development of the strategy and also the development of the integrated care partnership, and that's absolutely underpinned by the subsidiarity, collaboration and co-production, and we've heard a lot today about that inclusive approach. with our partners, and that's absolutely going to be one of our driving factors behind the work the health and care integration team do, whether that be at place or ICB or in the wider system. So we've got a lot of partnerships, so we want to build on this. This is not about starting from a blank sheet of paper. It's really important that, you know, people say don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have a huge amount of, I think, strength in the partnership that we want to use as a springboard. But we also acknowledge that we need to do further work, particularly with the BCFSE sector. And Jane Cass, who's here today, we're doing a lot of work on how we can think about the engagement on a longer term basis, the framework that we use to engage, and that plan, and how it will underpin our integration agenda going forward. So that's really, really important. And also then how we do ensure that we still work within delivering the triple aims and NHS guidance, as well as some of the things that relate to our local government partners and the wider partnership sector. So just really in relation to health and care integration, I'm sure you would appreciate me saying this, I think it is a game changer. This is absolutely, I think, if we focus our effort, we will make improvements for our population and the people in our communities. It's got to signal a different way of working that's more progressive, and I think David Levy has alluded to some of this about our different ways of working. The virtual wards is a really key example of integration, and I think we can build on that. I said it earlier on, I was bowled over by actually the ambition here for integration, and I'm trying to harness all of that and go at pace, whilst I think, picking up Jim's point, we do need to see some quick wins early on, so trying to agree them collectively I think is going to be really important. I'm very mindful we are on a journey from 5 to 4, but actually I just want to reiterate my very early point. There is lots going on in places in those neighbourhoods, and the 5 to 4 arrangement and that new scaffolding doesn't impact on that work that we're doing in integrated neighbourhood teams. So again, it's just getting the art of providing the right architecture around the 4 places. I've come from places where we've always been aligned to local authority. I think that's a really important step forward. So I just need to try and work through some of those governance issues in the background. And just to say, I was talking to Jeff earlier, we've got lots of successes to date on integration, huge amounts of work in MDTs in Morecambe. There's work on the ARC, Finney House we've heard about before. I think these are prime examples of really true integration opportunities that we can build on for the future. So that's about the broader agenda, and I suppose just for places, in the paper we have got quite a detailed update on the work we do on place development. I'm not going to go in great detail, but I think we talk about reviewing the strategic narrative. That doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but actually that's describing what we do, how we're going to do it, and I think that links to the work we've just discussed with the PCB. I do think we need further work on the back of this David Pearson report to talk about the operating model, the operating framework, the way in which we're going to work within places, whether that be delegation from the ICB, whether that be how the partnership within those places agree their priorities and contribute to that wider system delivery. And I think that's an emerging theme now that we're working with at pace and trying to get some work scaled up so it's not just in one particular area. However, if areas are ready to go further faster, we want to accelerate that support for them. Unfortunately the place directors aren't here, 2 of them were due to attend today, but they're doing a lot of work to think about the relationships in place, those partnerships, but also about what does a place-based plan look like, and who does that involve, and it will be different in each of our places, and we need to acknowledge that some variation is acceptable and the difference is permitted. And I take Sarah's point about some of the how we chunk things up earlier, but I actually truly believe a blended commission and provision model, if we can get it right and pull it off, will absolutely be the key ingredient to success going forward. And I'm sure you can see I'm really passionate about health and care integration, and it's something that I think we need to be bold and we need to be ambitious, but we need to make sure we've got this planned properly, and when we're levelling up, we are allowing places to not go at the speed of the slowest, but we can still, where we can invest or work with places on integration agendas, we allow that to happen. And I see my role as a convening, sort of coordinating and supportive role in doing that. So lots of work to be done. We have a next steps programme for place development on the back of the Stayner Pearson report. We're working with the 4 place directors. I've attended the Lancashire Place-Based Partnership very recently. I'm attending the others. I think what you can see there is an emerging set of leaders within that room that really understand the agenda, and I think, again, we need to make sure that we can use those opportunities to share across each of the partnerships, but also support those partnerships to develop and grow as fast as they can.
Thank you.
I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Chief Finance Officer.
I'm not going to ask a finance question, but it's also fine. I'm just going to really sort of feed in a couple of discussions I've had with some of the place directors, which have been really good over the last couple of weeks. And I think if I was a member of the public listening to this board today, I'd be thinking, gosh, you've got all this ICP strategy, there's priorities here, there's an operating model there, there's place here. And I think the stuff that Kevin described at the beginning of the meeting about that sort of say to the nation, then what is the sort of long-term plan, 10-year strategy, 3-year financial framework, will bring this together and it will make more sense. Because what I'm seeing, and especially in the conversations with the place directors, was actually seeing how this is all starting to map together and make sense. And that's the bit that when we see that visually, when we see that coming together, people will make more sense of it. But in part of that discussion, there was obviously, you know, I'm a member of Health and Wellbeing Board in Blackburn Darwin with Abdul, and I've seen the strategy there around starting, you know, which mirrors the stuff we heard this morning with starting well to end in or dying well, and it's a great framework. And what I could see from the place directors over the last couple of weeks is how this does hang together really well and align. It's not something separate. And all the conversations we've been having, I've been listening to through the board today, I can actually visualise now how that's starting to come together. So I think this next stage and this next piece, when we see it, will make more sense for people, I suppose. And the devolving of budgets and the place will come because we'll get the operating models right on that.
Thanks. Thank you. Got Kevin, Sheena, Jeff.
Just to build on Craig's ambition, I think it's great, and that ambition is absolutely palpable. We just talked about providing collaboration, and that's important, but actually the majority of our services that are provided in nuclear hospital are locally based services. They're not the big specialist services, they're locally based services. And so getting that right in place is absolutely crucial, whether that's dealing with the immediacy of winter pressures, whether that's dealing with long-term issues in terms of health inequalities. It is about place. So we absolutely support this, and we really support that training ambition that you talked about.
Thank you, Kevin. Sheena?
Yeah, very much welcome the piece of work and the progress that's been identified, but I guess in my head it's our ambition on this I think is really important, because everything we've talked about today and that needs to really work alongside our communities, unless we do that and we work as one, and you know all the principles that you put in your first line, Craig, we are not going to be making the difference that we need to make to population. We're going to be, you know, sort of not able to move on from the current crises that have been articulated earlier in the meeting. So I think it's really important that we have that ambition to actually move at pace with this, but in moving at pace we take people with us. So that bit about actually working alongside our communities in the way that Tracy and others have described today, and moving into that different way of working, that operating model. But I also think it's really important that everybody signs up to this, and we've all got to do that. So the integration piece and us all working very differently is absolutely key. And that's why we need to do it with people. So you know, if we just take, for example, primary care, we've got a real need there to look very differently about how we do primary care, do it with primary care, but with also our communities, and make the fuller report real. And I think that's important when you move, Kevin, into your sort of state of the nation, but then the so what, so that translation and transaction piece. The final bit I just wanted to raise, which was the point 6 in the appendix from Sir David Pearson, was about the population health information, because unless we actually understand and work with that information in a positive way with people, we're not really going to get underneath the challenges that we've got and really think about how do we prioritise and how do we particularly get into tackling inequalities. So it's quite interested in that in terms of looking to us in particularly around how we pull that all in and that population health piece.
Thank you. Very good, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I support what Craig said. I think we're actually in a better place than you might imagine, considering the fact that we had a hiatus for many months waiting for all the place directors to be in post. So actually, we are a little bit behind where we'd like to be, but actually we're in a good place considering that. And you've got the place directors chopping at the bit to get on with things and working together well, I would say. So I feel quite positive about all that. I think you know, the integration is the prize, as Craig is alluding to, because when I've seen it works really well. We developed our neighbourhood teams many years ago in Morecambe Bay, and they've delivered some fantastic stuff when they've been allowed to do, you know, the MDTs you mentioned and the like. And so that there'll be other examples around the patch, but it's not uniform. So we don't want to hold people back, but we want to share best practice through all that, and that will come. I think the thing that we need to move at real speed with, and Craig knows I'm going to say this, is the operating model. Because they want to know exactly how they work, what their responsibilities, what they're licensed to do, etc., etc. So we can move to that next stage that Sam talked about delegations and money. So they're really willing to go, and we need to know that together. And I think we will, because I think we've got a good team supporting this work.
Thanks, Dave. Jeff and Sheena have covered some of the points I was going to make, and that was about the pace that we should move at with regards to place-based partnerships. And there's reference, I think, and Sam alluded to it, there's reference in the paper about resources and the directors that are identifying that resource requirement in the places. I've been sort of lobbied really from one of the Better Start Partnership, which used to have an agreement with the CCG about leverage funding from the CCG into that partnership. And obviously I can only report that until we understand the position on resource and allocation for the place-based partnerships, then we can start to begin to build back those partnerships that we have with those local teams. So I would agree entirely on the speed of this and pace of this, and I think we need to get this in place as soon as possible. We need the integration directors to understand what resource and allocation they're going to be receiving in a fairly timely manner. Thank you.
Angie, then Tracy, please.
Thank you. I don't really have much to add, but as a partner in the ICB on place-based partnerships, I think I have to just say that as local authorities, we fully endorse all of the work that's going on. I think Craig articulated it really well for us. I think the board have made some helpful comments. I think critical from the local authority side in this is to make sure that we are giving voice appropriately to our district councils in particular and the BCFS. I'm sure our colleagues will be talking about that again, which is a common theme, and that we align our local authority resources appropriately in here. So I just really wanted to make those endorsing points.
Thank you. John Tracy.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Craig. I think really good summary of where things are up to. I think I agree with the comments made, particularly with Sam's comments about feeling that there's a sense of it's coming together. I certainly feel that's happening in Blackpool, and I think there was a real kind of hiatus of, we felt that things had stalled, and certainly over the last sort of 3 months there's a real kind of sense of pace gathering again. And I think the good thing is as well, again from the perspective of the voluntary sector, we've not lost some of that momentum around some of those wider determinants of health. They're there, they're integrated within the plans. We can really see where partners play different roles within this. So I think there's a real sense of gaining momentum, working at pace and everything coming together. I think, like Angie, it's understanding really kind of our role. I'm less kind of concerned about not having the operating model, because I think what it's allowed us to do is kind of think a bit more widely about actually what is the purpose of the place-based partnerships. But I do take your point about the fact that, you know, we really need some kind of designated powers here now to actually make some decisions about what we do. I think, as I said right at the top with the ICP strategy when Michael was here, aligning what's happening in place with those start well, live well, die well kind of life course has really, I think, to me, given us that framework that seems now to be talking to the strategy. There seems to be that joined up kind of feel to it. So I think really positive things developing at first.
In the appendix, Sir David Pearson makes a point around the importance of information sharing. And just to give some assurance to the board, we have a really well developed shared care record within Lancashire, South Cumbria, one of the most used across the country. But there is still gaps around social care, voluntary sector data, and that's in the plan. So that would really support this agenda. And Sheena's point around sort of understanding our population health data is really important. It's about understanding our communities and our communities within communities, triangulating with a virtual ward. Then that would require a different approach depending on what the backgrounds of our communities are. So it's really understanding our community. So the information sharing, population health, really important on this agenda.
Thank you. Time moves quickly, doesn't it, of course. But at our first meeting, I think, as a statutory body, our first main business meeting, we agreed the new place configuration. I'm encouraged by the positive comments Tracy and Angie and others have made, but if you'd said then, at the point at which we agreed the configuration, where do you think we'll be in 6 months' time? I thought we were more ambitious than to be where we are now. We're still talking about meaningful delegation in 2024. When we all read Thriving Places all that time ago, we wouldn't have anticipated waiting until 2024 to start to make some of this resource backed at local level. And on the one hand, as colleagues have said, and as a board we're guided by that, we're making progress. But if I summarise David Pearson's point, it's get on with it quicker than you're doing now. And the tone of his, come on, it's not reflected in the tone of how we describe and where the programme is. So I think, Kevin, there's a big point here about, we set ourselves up to be agile, we set ourselves up to be ambitious. We agreed the configuration. When we interviewed for the great appointments to the place directors, when we interviewed for them, we had the windows open in the interview room because it was the middle of summer. And there's been points at which during the winter I felt that a better developed place arrangement would have given us another important dynamic in managing some of the pressures that we've gone through. So I'm encouraged by what board members have said, but still feel impatient about the pace at which all this is moving.
Could I add to that? Look, I share that really. To be honest, I think the ambition here is to have a world-class, community-centric health and care system which has got a place at its heart. It's critical to our strategy going forward. But I think we've got to be honest and say it's not where, I'm not comfortable where we are now. I'm not comfortable at the pace of change yet. I think we are moving in the right direction, by the way. But, you know, just to be brutally honest about it, when we made the decision to realign places to the principal law, it was absolutely the right decision. But we didn't have all of our place directors in place until December. So, you know, that has an impact. So what that's then resulted in is we had 800 staff, ICB staff and CSU staff in our organisation that we needed to find places for in the structure. So you've had the rest of the organisation rightly going ahead, setting up the structures, and there's a bit of catch-up to do at place level. There's a bit of tension there too, as well, which you need to be honest about are we getting our fair share and all of that. And I think here, basically in rough terms, we have an establishment budget that's about 34 million, and we've got a programme budget that's about 30 million.
Yes.
And then we've got a system budget that's 3.8 billion. Okay? So what we need to do going forward, in my view, is make sure that we focus on that 3.8 billion and look at the community side of that system, there's about 300 million on continuing healthcare, there's about 300 million on primary care, there's about 300 million or so on BCF, there's 150 million on community health services. I think what we need to do over the next year, and it is going to take time, is to have a really serious devolution program that is measured, because a lot of these services, frankly, from the CCGs are not in great shape. The CHC is a perfect example. That needs to operate at the place level, but we've got some real risks in all of that. So we've got to work through this, and we've got to make sure that I agree, we've got 4 great appointments. They need to be in the heart of all of this process, doing it with our exec team together. And that's where we're trying to get to. But I just want, at the same time, we want an ambitious investment programme which needs to feature in our long-term plan, which is about more of the Finning House type developments. We want co-investment in domiciliary care, an enhanced approach to primary care, for proactive primary care with population health, a step change in prevention for key challenges in Lancashire and South Cumbria, and real progress on integration over a period of time. And we need to look at the whole system, as we were saying earlier, on the Ruth Canal report. So I'm still excited, but I want to acknowledge that it is a bit messy at the moment. There are some tensions. We've got really good people in the exec team and really good people in the place, and there's a bit of a job to be done to bring that together in a cohesive way, so we're one team going forward. So it's not perfect, we're moving in the right direction. I'm acutely aware of the need to pick up the pace, but I think we also need to be really honest with you about what's possible and what's not possible, and what's sensible to devolve. There's some parts of the system that are pretty unstable, and I would feel nervous about devolving just straight away, And that's why I've always said 2024 is a more sensible time frame, and CHC is a perfect example of that, and we'll take you through that just before Christmas.
Okay, thank you, Craig. All very clear. Good. Well done, Craig, thank you. Chief Finance Officer, Finance Report. We've got opportunity for a bigger discussion later, so we've perhaps just received the report. Do you want to talk us through that?
Well, there's just a couple of points really. I think the main point really was that although it's at month 8, it's been assessed 3/4 way through the year at month 9. And what's been helpful this month, just to make the point, is that we've had a finance committee meeting that's actually supported that. So we were able to take some of the individual aspects of the board paper through it. So that's been really helpful. And I suppose the bottom line, without going into the detail, if we want to move on, I think the key thing is what we're seeing is, although there is still risk in landing a position at the end of the year, I think that the key thing is at month 9, when we've risk assessed it, that position is stabilising. It hasn't got worse from month 8 into month 9. I think we can see some really good plans from all organisations in starting to pull that position back to where we want to be at the end of the year. The key thing here is that people have worked incredibly hard. When you think about starting the year at £180 million worth of risk and the amount of operational pressures we've had, it's only through the great work that we've had across the system and the providers, the system all working together to get us to anything like a sort of position we need to be at the end of the year. So I think we're reducing the risk to the year end all the time. There's still a lot of pressures in there to manage over the last few months, but there's some clear actions in place, either through the ISS exec or through the providers, in sort of landing where we need to be. One of the things that is in the paper that's important is the discussions that are going on with NHSEI about what we put in at month 10 to land the position, and using the historical surplus as a potential option to allow us to break even on a rolling basis, whilst having potentially up to a 30 million deficit in the system at the end of the year. So I'm happy to take any questions. There was a point I wanted to make, just building on some of the earlier discussion around the investment, because I think there is a real opportunity now when we get the programme and transformation work pulled together to look at those streams of monies that are coming down next year to really start to sort of make some of these changes. So when we're talking about virtual wards and we're talking about SDF funding and we're talking about the winter money, that might be coming down to make good money we've already got, but it does make it recurrent and it does mean that we can do something different and we could actually start to make some impact. So I think the planning that we're about to do becomes really, really important to sort of unlock the longer term financial position. So it's not so much now this year, it's more about starting to look into next year about what are we doing to address that longer term ambition really around finances.
Thank you, Roy, you chair the finance committee.
Okay, thank you. I think it's really important to recognise that, Sam, thank you for that report and thank you for the work your team have been doing in trying to still land us the break-even position at the end of the year, because it's really significant the amount of work that's been done over the last 2 or 3 months. We should also recognise it's a finance performance report. You know, it's a performance committee as well. And I have to say, I think, and perhaps we'll talk about it later, that the performance element that was described in the committee papers is not presently something that we would be expecting. I think performance, and I recognise it's difficult and it changes because of the position that we're in with the acute trust, but I think the performance element, as I said, is not perhaps up to standard for the ICB at the present time. And I don't say that lightly, Chairman, but I think it's important that we all understand that, because we've talked about the performance report at this particular meeting, and we had a very good discussion with Nottingham ICB about performance, about how they deal with their reporting, and I think we're going to have a discussion as a board about that and how that particularly works and how it should work into the future. I would like to discuss the £27 million historical surplus that Sam's alluded to, but not at this present time. Perhaps we can have comments about that later. But I'd just like to say that the work that's been carried out by the team is really good. Thank you.
Anything to add, Jim?
Perhaps a couple of very quick points. We talked a lot about the system working. There's been some great system working. We've been almost delivering a financial position for this year. So, you know, that is actually the providers and the ICB together are going to deliver something pretty good, basically, for this year. But the problem is that there's very little recurrent savings being delivered within the system at this point in time. Kevin talked about the problem next year around sustainability and delivering sustainable position. We're probably getting to this a bit more later on, but there's some very big challenges ahead of us. We've done great to get where we will get to for this year, but looking ahead, there's some enormous financial problems. I'd like to mention performance, but I guess performance, perhaps we'll come on to that again later. But yeah, it's great this year. Next year is looking pretty dire at this point.
Well, the evidence shows that the expenditure trend lines aren't going to change from where they've been in the last 8 weeks of this business year. So I think that and if they continue into next year for the reasons that colleagues have discussed, we've got a problem. I think it's really important to pick this up, Kevin, in the broader discussion you highlighted before about where next year starts. Yeah. Any other points anyone wishes? Okay, thank you, Sam. Performance, but we've had a big build-up off Roy Maggie.
Sorry. I just can't read it differently. You sat in the safe zone. I don't disagree with what you're saying. So, before I start my reflections on how we are performing on a number of our NHS key standards, the report is up to month 8, and I want to try and bring that more up to date, really, with some of the things that I want to say. But like other colleagues already today, particularly Kevin in his report, I do want to start by placing on record my continued thanks for everybody really that's working in our system across health and social care, and indeed really across all of the country. And I know our performance was discussed in the Finance and Performance Committee, and take on board the feedback and the comments that people have made. But as well as putting on record my thanks to people, I also want to put on record as well, if I may, Chair, that we really are living through a very extraordinary period. And actually, to a certain extent, we sat in a board meeting today and it feels very normal. But actually, the impact that we're seeing across all of our organisations as a result of the impact of the industrial action that we're facing means that this winter we cannot compare to last winter. And I very definitely hope that we can't compare it to next winter, and I really hope this is a period in time that is soon behind us. I don't want us in this board to normalise this extraordinary period, and I don't say that to justify any of the performance standards that we're seeing, because ironically we have actually started to see some improvements in some of our key standards whilst we're going through some of these significant challenging days. It's easier to explain to my family, you know, you can't get a train today because there is none, because there's a strike. But actually you can still go to hospital and you can still go and get your appointments, because we're 24/7 and we're stretching ourselves in numerous ways in order to keep ourselves going. We've seen on the news today the impact of the teachers coming out on strike. And again, that affects us just as much as our own strikes do, because we've got people today who've got no childcare, who have not been able to be in the workplace, whose clinics will be cancelled, or the services that they provide will be compromised. So I put that on point because there is such a lot of effort going into keeping our services going, that when people hear that we're still unsatisfied as system leaders with their performance, they think, do the board members really know how difficult it is to be undertaking the roles that they're doing? Colleagues have asked this morning as well about how do we compare with others. Well, I'll tell you that during the strike period in Lancs and South Cumbria, so far we are comparing well with the amount of activity that we've had to step down. And that, again, is testament to the people that are working across all of our services. We've cancelled 9 inpatients, and none of those, or only one complex patient actually got cancelled. The rest have been, at this time of year, as we've talked about before, we don't really do much routine, but we've been able to let the more routine of the complex cases go. We've cancelled 72 day cases and 105 outpatients new appointments, 221 follow-up patients. And we've been able to rebook all of those patients as well. So our administrative staff are really playing their part in this complex jigsaw that they rebuild every day. We haven't cancelled any cancers, although unfortunately we saw 2 days during the nursing strike where we had to cancel chemotherapy patients on the day of their infusions. We did rebook those patients very, very quickly, and within the same week, those patients, which were in the several hundred patients, were able to access their care. So that's not, sadly, the same position across the country. And when we talk about some of the improvements nationally in relation to reduction of elective waiting times, the strike impact is one of the biggest and most significant risks that people are facing. I'll start just by touching a bit on urgent and emergency care, if I may, because the last 2 months, December and January, have seen really unusual patterns of activity in our emergency departments. The first 2 weeks of December, we saw record numbers of attendances, with particular high spikes at Lancs Teaching and Blackpool Teaching Hospitals. The reasons were multiple, but mainly we saw 4 reasons. We saw huge attendances in relation to the Strep A outbreaks across the country. We saw the impact of the cold weather snap, where we had a number of days below freezing, and that impacted on cardiac and respiratory conditions. And we saw a very early start to what has been a very severe flu season. And in December, we also had a spike in our COVID cases. From mid-December to January, the number of beds that were occupied really spiked, and that was despite our putting on and touching on the third page about the assurances around the winter schemes as well. 27 schemes, 24 of them now well and truly being used. Some of those schemes were scheduled to come online after Christmas at the start of what is usually where we see those pressures. We had to pull those forward into December, but it was very challenging to try and get that new demand matching what we were seeing at a much earlier point in the season than anticipated. The practical constraints of trying to manage those patients with such high infection levels, cohorting them in the way that was necessary, meant that our number of patients who were waiting 4 hours to be seen, treated, admitted or discharged absolutely spiked, and we've seen some of the worst performance that we've seen records to date, not just here but across the country. We also saw a record number of patients waiting an extended period of time to be admitted to hospital once the decision was made. And we've got some really sad stories about every single space being opened in every single hospital in order to accommodate that relentless activity at the front door. Now I'm emphasising that point because the care that we've delivered over that first period of the winter was absolutely not of the standard that any NHS organisation would want to see. I think someone, Jim or Roy have mentioned our performance being well below the bar. Well, sadly, we've got lots of evidence that will underpin that, and we will look as we get later into the year, March or April, to bring some of that back in a data-driven way, so we can look particularly at some of the impact on ambulance handovers, etc. But we're working on that now, ready to board at future meetings. However, I want to say that the last 6 weeks, as quick as that spike came, we've seen that spike fall away. And we're actually seeing some really good performance now across those same indicators. So our 4 hours, our 12 hours, and particularly our ambulance handover times are doing very well compared with many other areas of the country. Now that doesn't mean that I'm proud of the performance that we're achieving. It means we're doing well against the rest of the country, which is struggling as much, if not more, than what we are. Why is the spike dissipated? Well, for a number of reasons. We've seen those winter plans now executed, and we are seeing benefits of them. Virtual ward was one of those initiatives, and we've had a great debate about that this morning. We're seeing mature mutual aid between the providers, and I'm sure Kevin will have a view on that as well. And we're also seeing an effect of the strikes. So in Lancs and South Cumbria, our attendance has dropped dramatically, with the media highlighting that if you do go to the ED, you're probably in for not a great experience. So we have continued for 6 weeks to see some benefits of that. I am particularly proud to have been part of an effort to see such a dramatic improvement in handover times. But our performance isn't happening by accident, and I think this goes back, Jim, to your point as well earlier. The models of care that we've currently got across the country, but particularly here in Lancs and South Cumbria, will continue to give us the performance that we get. We've talked a lot here about the changes that we need to make and our commitment to place. I thought, gosh, there's a lot of P's in my head at the moment. Performance is the P that is there all of the time. How are we doing? How can we improve? But the provider models are really crucial in that, because without seeing changes, we will continue to get the outcomes that we're getting. When we're trying to do everything through every hospital on your doorstep, we will continue to see struggles in order to provide the right levels of staff to be able to do that. I would say that the committee in common that we've acknowledged here before for the provider collaborative gives us great hope to see some of that, the pathways and the models of care having some hope of changing in the not too distant future. Place, again, we don't need to go over that, but it's so very important in seeing some of the changes that we need to see. Access to primary care, access to virtual wards. How do we prevent, through place-based care, some of those constraints that we see in the ED departments or in other emergency portals? And of course, the final P for me is pace delivery of improvement, and I think you've summed that up better than me. So we've seen some improvements, we've seen some dramatic improvements. So mean time for admitted patients has reduced from the very high levels of circa 20 hours at the beginning of January to around 10 hours. We would not have been able to do a change like that. We've been still saying 3, 4, 5 months to see changes of such large numbers. but I'm really pleased to say that we have to continue to maximise the benefits that we see through the burning platform of strike action. None of us can rest on our laurels. We've done well so far through the strike action, although as we bring some more data consequences of the strike action to March and April's board meeting, I know from being on many national and regional calls that we are not seeing some of the same compromises that other parts of the country have, and I think Kevin referred to the South East and the South West as areas under particular pressure earlier. Level of patients who no longer meet a medical reason to reside in our hospitals. Over 50% of our beds are occupied by patients with no particular medical need to be there, either for a physical or a mental health reason. Now, it was pleasing to see that 6.5 million was given to us as our share of the 20 million discharge funding earlier this month. And we are working really hard to maximise the impacts that that money can have. And again, by next month we'll know how we were able to spend. I was going to mention the virtual wards and the absolute imperative to continue with that, but I've already mentioned it. Touch very quickly without giving eye contact to the chair, because I know I'm dragging out the time. But elective, overall, we have got an improving position with our elective performance. But we've still got a long way to see that performance, giving us a system that we're proud of, really, to be a top performer. We were commended by Professor Tim Briggs at the regional national meeting earlier this month. We were particularly commended by Tim to other trusts across the North West for the stepped change that we have seen in our theatre utilisation, but also in our clinical engagement. There was a real acknowledgement from national and regional colleagues that they can see green shoots across Lancs and South Cumbria, and again to say, how does that compare with others, Jeff? He was encouraging others to come and have a look at what we're doing. However, we've got East Lancs and Lancs Teaching that are both currently Tier 1 reporting trusts for their cancer and elective performance. Good news that East Lancs look like they will exit that process because they're making great improvements, but we need to give more support to our colleagues in Lancs Teaching to see the same level of improvements made there. And that really is the summary from me. Happy to take questions, Chair, and I'm sure colleagues are as well in elements of performance.
Very good, thank you. It's just the most unusual and pressured of times in that sense, in the context that you very nicely described is important for us. Now, Kevin, do you want to add anything, or Chris?
Just a couple of comments. I think the first thing to say, I think the report would be helped by having that national and regional comparative data, because even in the most difficult of period, that period over sort of late December, early January, although our performance was nowhere near where it needed to be, it was still significantly better than the rest of Cheshire, Merseyside, Greater Manchester and other parts of the country. So I think having that performance data just puts it into context. We are under significant pressure, but as a system we're doing incredibly well. So I think that would be helpful in terms of any report. And the other thing I'd say is that the real push now is to continue the great work that we're doing through winter, but really to get on top of the elective recovery, and that's where the focus is. There will be decisions and compromises that we're going to have to take over the next couple of months, particularly in terms of the delivery of 78 weeks, because we've only got so much capacity. So how do we balance the cancer recovery with the elective recovery across all the providers is a choice that the providers are taking day in, day out. But we are on track to deliver 78 weeks continuation by the 31st of March. And again, that is a massive effort across all of the providers, and it's being supported by providers working together as one block with mutual aid for some brilliant work.
Thank you.
Yeah, please, thanks. So I think the improvement picture that Maggie's talked about with the acute metrics can be mirrored with mental health, especially when we look at reducing attendances at ED and reducing admissions. I think part of that is on the back of the initial response service, which we've invested in as an ICB. And the turnaround times for access are now 1 hour for urgents, 1 day for routines. It's transformed from before we had that service. And also the street triage in collaboration with Lancashire Police. We've seen in Pennine in January, we have seen 3 136 detentions. That would normally be around 30. So the idea is now that will roll out next in Lancashire Teaching Hospital. That should be by the end of February, and then by the end of April, we'll have it across Blackpool and the Bay. So significant transformation in that urgent front door response.
Well done, Chris. So, look, we've talked a lot today about ways of working with the systems, and one of the things for us in our governance that I'm very mindful we need to develop is this right balance between how we consider things in the committees and what comes to the board. And I think Roy and Jim, with the work doing with the Finance and Performance Committee, when we get into a rhythm with this, I could give the overview report, you'll then be able to say the 2 or 3 things that gave us most concern in the committee, i.e. current performance isn't in the right place and we're not sure where the action plans are to deal with it. We can then, if we can do that work in the committee, we can then focus on those issues when we get into this. Sarah, you want to talk about?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just summarise, I won't go through the whole paper, I assume people have read it. So we've talked a few times at board around health checks for people with a learning disability and autism, because it comes in the performance report, and really what this paper is trying to present to board is the wider picture of the agenda around people with a learning disability and or autism, because health checks is one tiny element of it. I wanted to start by saying that the people in Lancashire and Cumbria who are living with a learning disability and or autism are some of our most vulnerable residents, who often have the most adverse impact from equity of access or inequalities, and COVID in particular really demonstrated the impact of COVID on people living with learning disability and or autism. The ICB has now inherited the statutory responsibilities on this agenda that did used to sit with CCGs, and there are some really important key performance indicators that we are monitored on, that we have to, and it's not about monitoring really NH syndrome, it's about, they are important indicators because they are about driving, reducing inequalities in this group of people, but also about driving better outcomes. So the paper is trying to pull out for you those indicators and where we currently are. When ICBs were formed, NH England have asked each ICB to have a named executive lead, and that's sat now in my portfolio. We also chose an ICB to separate out mental health and learning disability and autism, which I thought was really important to make sure that we had the right focus on this group of people, and it didn't get interlinked and subsumed really by the mental health agenda, which I think there is a danger of sometimes. So in terms of where we are currently, we have inherited challenges from across the CCGs. We have inherited some historical challenges in this area, so there are areas where we're not performing, and we have got backlogs, and we have got things that we need to address, and that they're highlighted in the paper. Going forward, there will be, I think the first one is in March, a regular quarterly report will go to Quality Committee with these indicators, so there will be oversight and assurance through Quality Committee. Before I pull out the challenges and where we are, I also wanted to highlight in the paper, we talked a lot today about co-production and resident voice and working with our communities, and the paper does highlight some really excellent work in Lancashire and South Cumbria where we do co-produce with people living with a learning disability. They've co-produced the strategy that is going to Quality Committee later this month. And the other thing I really wanted to highlight in the report, and if any of you here have never watched the videos of Ollie McGowan's mum, Paula, who talks about the horrific, that was a preventable death in a non-specialist setting, so he wasn't in a special setting for somebody with a learning disability, he was in a general hospital, and despite those parents continually telling professionals that the medication they were going to give him wasn't suitable for him, they didn't listen, he did die. And her campaign over a number of years now means that there is mandatory training for all staff to try and raise that awareness, and our trusts are going to roll out that mandatory training. It's really, really important. But in terms of particular areas that we are challenged in, we have got a challenge with out-of-area placement. We've got some mitigations. The learning disability team at the ICB are working really well with the teams at LCFT on some plans to try and have more supported living and some plans to reduce those outed areas. A little bit of challenge at the moment from CQC that we need to work on, but NHS England are supporting those plans. We have got challenges with our inpatient trajectories. We're not going to meet them this year. But we've got mitigation. Some of that is about having more options of where those people can go once they get discharged, but we have got those challenges. We've talked before about health checks. Based on the discussions here now, the team along with the primary care team are starting to hone in at more practice level and PCN level with the practices where we know some of that is about them not probably prioritising this the way they should. So we are doing that targeted work. And in particular what the paper highlights, and I think we probably need to have a future quality committee and board discussion on, is the significant challenges for both children and adults around the autism spectrum pathway and some early backlogs that we've inherited, but without some easy solutions to that, and they are fragile services. And I think we are going to have to look at what we do and investment on that. However, we've only just this morning had some notification of future SDF funding, so it might not necessarily be, there might be ways that we can invest in that isn't necessarily financial pressure, but we do need to prioritise some of these areas. And we've also got, we've now put some extra resourcing around the leader reviews, which is really important for learning from, I guess, from people with a learning disability, but there is a backlog there that we are trying to also address. Last point I'll make, because Sheena kindly pointed out this morning, what we didn't put in the paper, was an oversight, was just an update on clinical treatment reviews. So it's the ICB's responsibility to do the clinical treatment reviews when people might be moving out from an inpatient setting into the community, and then to do the quality reviews. And actually, this is a good news story. I had an update before I came into board. Actually, we are on target with those. We are up to date with all of those, and we've got robust processes around that, which is really important from an assurance of the well-being and the safety of this group of people. So I will finish that. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Sarah. John.
Just a couple of things. Thank you, David. Thank you, Sarah. Just to say, really good to see this report, Sarah, despite how hard the challenges are. And I just wanted a couple of things, really. One, it's right that this paper is around the kind of health performance, but you also talking here about this being a system issue. And I just wanted to kind of reiterate the support from directors of adults and directors of children's services to work with you and the team on it, as we already are. This is a combined effort. And then thirdly, just come back to your point, Kevin, earlier about what's a place and what's a kind of corporate level. And this is one, isn't it, where on a day-to-day front line, this is absolutely place-based work. That's what we do. But in terms of some of the grip that you're bringing and that we collectively need to bring, there's some of the things that need to be resolved. It's right that we try and do that bit actually as a kind of collective corporate level. Thank you.
Thanks, John. That's very helpful. I've got David Levy, David Blacklock next, please.
Okay, thank you. I may pick up cancer later, but to keep with the theme of LD and the health checks, I did have an action last meeting to go away and understand what some of the issues are. Certainly having spoken to members of Sarah's team who are involved in LD and autism and the primary care team, they are less concerned with the position that we reported. The data is from November, remember. West Lancashire in particular has a history of doing the LD health checks in Q4. And so we've been out to them. We've been out to the ones who are at the bottom three, for example. They've all got plans, and one of them's at 83% already. So I think I just want to kind of let the board know that I don't think this is going to be too much of a challenge, but nevertheless, Sarah's team, my team, are working to ensure that we get across the line on that.
Okay, thanks, David. It's very helpful and very encouraging. David.
Two questions. Thank you, Chair. First one is just, I'd really like to understand where the strategy is going to be held. Who will hold the ring on the strategy? Which group, which board? Where will that feed into? And obviously, the Learning Disability Partnership boards that exist across the county, across the patch, will play some role. I think we need to understand how those two things work together and integrate. And the second was just a comment, really. I was very surprised at the number of people that seemingly turned down a health check. I thought that was really high, 24% of people turn it down. I can't understand that. So I think we might need to dig, I can't, work with hundreds of people with learning disabilities and can't imagine them turning down a health check. many of them. So I think we need to dig into that, or I'd just like to understand more about that. Really.
So do you want to hold on to these points that I remember this? I'll go Debbie, then Chris, then Tashina.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's an excellent report. I really welcome you sort of shining a light in this area and enabling boards to get closer to it and consider decision making and resourcing around this important area. Dave sort of touched on the architecture point. That was sort of my first point. So how is it held? How is it driven? Who's accountable? How does it work through? Particularly as I was conscious that the learning disability strategy and the autism strategy that was produced last year, fantastic pieces of work, really brilliant engagement with people with lived experience and families, and they made some very definite recommendations around structures, change, delivery. So it'd be great to understand how that's picked up and learned from and being played into our way forward to inform it. The second point was just to encourage us to level up. So particularly around the sort of assessment point, it seemed that there's a fantastic service or an enhanced service in East Lancs at the moment where there's pre-assessment support around autism and post-assessment support around autism. It'd be great to fully consider and try and ensure that that's in place when we look at a system-wide approach. It's really important.
Thanks, Debbie. We'll come back to you. Chris?
Thank you, Chair. So I likewise really welcome this report, and I think the focus that the ICB puts on mental health and learning disabilities and autism should be really noted, because it's not the case, I don't think, speaking to my other chief exec colleagues nationally. I think the capacity and demand modelling that we've got niche just finalising will be really helpful around that levelling up and looking at the under-commissioned pathways and the legacy of 8 CCGs commissioning different ways, different outputs. I think the benefit that the ICB can bring to that area is fantastic. And also from the Oliver McGowan and the documentary that was aired on ITV just after the Panorama, that's the one, about Greater Manchester, and we had a conversation as chief execs around how learning disability and autism patients are cared for and what support there are in acute trusts, and how we as that mental health and learning disability organisation can support. And I know the chief nurses have taken that up with their team, so just a couple of points there.
Thanks, Chris. It's very helpful. And Tashina.
Yeah, so again, just to echo what everybody said about the importance of us seeing this at a board level, but also how we work forwards to make sure we have that oversight of a very important part of our population, and that real challenge about really focusing on that, not only within our services, for example, the ones that Chris provides, but it's that bit about really understanding, which is where the Oliver McGowan and the point that Chris just made is really important. It's part of everything we do, so that we really understand, making sure that we first and foremost involve people with learning disabilities, and I absolutely see that really well within Lancs and Cumbria, but also that we are mindful in everything we do that they are part of our population that needs to be seen as absolutely key, but also that we understand how we come alongside people and provide a much better, and the integration piece of place is absolutely key at doing that. So it's something that we really should prioritise as we move forward.
Thank you, Sheena. Very good. And Sarah, one or two points to respond to.
I will try. Really good questions, David. So I don't think I'll be able to give you a full satisfactory answer, but I will do my best to respond. I think in terms of the digging deep first, you're absolutely right. The little bit of feedback I've had is some of that is about, because of course our offer is standard, isn't it? You need to come into the surgery to have a health check. So I think some of that not taking it up will be those people who may be adverse to coming into a surgery, and what we don't always do, it's not criticism of primary care, is that we can't always make reasonable adjustments that then accommodate for somebody's individual needs. So I suspect some of it is around that, and is probably around ignorance, but I absolutely agree we need, and the teams are doing that. We have got these health facilitation teams that are working very closely with primary care, and it's not just about helping the GPs increase health checks. Some of their close working is around how do they work with the local population and primary care to exactly what you said. So we will keep digging into that. I think in terms of the strategy, and for both, answering to both you and Debbie, I think some of this is still iterative, and it goes to what John said. I absolutely agree with what John said. I think this is an area where at place health and care teams, so adult social care, and the teams we've got in from the ICB, the clinical teams who are doing this day in day with the provider teams. Absolute scope here, and already do lots of it, to come together and really work and deliver in an integrated way. But in terms of the oversight, you know, the responsibility of this sits in different areas. We've got a health statutory responsibility. John's absolutely right. Director of Children's Services, Director of Adult Services have responsibility back up to local government. I think we've probably still got some work to do on having an overarching maybe view of that, because at the moment this probably gets picked up a little bit through safeguarding boards, a little bit through other partnership boards, SEND boards, a little bit through the boards that we have with people, and now it's going to start coming through our quality committee in here. And I think we've probably, you've raised this a number of times, David, I think we've still got a little bit of work to do as a system, mapping all that out, navigating it, and maybe trying to simplify some of that. So I think that's a work in progress. The two strategies, Debbie, mental health and learning, I think all that work was done, and then I think with the transition from CCGs to ICB, it got a bit shelved. So actually they're both coming to quality committee, I think, next month, and I think from there it's how do we then make sure they're widely promoted, they are informing the services. Now I actually think they are, because I think the people who have worked with residents co-producing both those strategies and the teams that are doing this work are taking on board what's in them to influence the work we're doing. But I think when they come through quality committee, we then need to have that discussion and that thinking about how do they, because actually, it's back to the strategy discussion earlier, we're in danger of having numerous strategies for numerous different things, and we've got to think about how we tie it all together. So I think that work is ongoing. So hopefully, and I think Chris's point about the niche work and that resource, some of the baseline work that's going on that is in the report, it is going to be really, really important for how we do some of this levelling up and levelling out, and probably does need to come back to board at some point in the future.
Thank you, we look forward to that. Right, Maggie, so we're back to you now with, you want to take the assurance framework on the urgent emergency, and then we can wrap up the whole performance thing.
Yeah, I take the papers read. This is just the distillation of everything that we're doing in the way that we have to report it. We have to bring it to board as part of the monitoring. We've been bringing it for a number of months now. I think it's self-explanatory, and I do believe that some of the improvements that we're seeing are down to particularly the demand and capacity schemes. So there's a lot of emphasis on those schemes, the impact they're having. As I said, in this extraordinary time, are they worth us putting into our BAU as we get into the planning? We're discussing all of that through the planning for next year. But happy to take, I mean, extremely grateful, David, for the money that we've seen this winter, even though I know it challenges people because nobody likes short-term money with no revenue from it. It is still making an impact for us across the system.
Jim?
Yeah, bringing off a discussion here, but for consideration either quality assurance group or the performance assurance group, the section Appendix A about the operational self-assessment good practice checklist, all the important bits in for the column headed partial at this point, and we don't know what's going on in the partial column, and it would be really helpful to have a discussion on those very important operational things in an assurance committee, so we can get some assurance. I don't take any assurance from it saying something's partial.
No, that's a place. I think you and I both grumbled about the word partial last time.
Yeah. But it's too big an item to be here, but it needs to be discussed somewhere.
But we still take partial. I take partial as a negative thing rather than a positive one.
Good to do that anyway. Bring it into one thing.
Okay, thank you. David?
Sorry, if I may just go back to cancer at one point, I think give us 1 minute. So very quickly, in the cancer report, first of all, you remember we did a deep dive last month. What we're doing is that you'll see that there are significant backlogs, particularly in colorectal cancer at Lancs Teaching Hospital, and we're working with the trust, we're working with the regional and national teams on that. So the intention is to ensure we have sufficient capacity, which now the backlog sits particularly within diagnostics, but also there's going to be a future challenge around colorectal surgery capacity. So working that through with the provider collaborative. But the ambition also is, and it was described in December, that we come back to the March meeting up with a strategy for cancer so we can improve the resilience of our cancer services. So that's the update for cancer.
Thank you. It's very helpful. Right, Maggie, so in terms of the totality of the performance report, everything you start, because we note all of that, continue to work through the committee as discussed in terms of how we can get the right scrutiny and assurance on a number of things and then bring by exceptions. It's very good.
Thank you.
Making good progress on this, thank you. Patient safety incident response framework, we get all the best jobs.
So thanks, Chair. Again, I'll just pull out the key points. I won't go through the paper. It's a really important paper for board because it's summarising, it's here to really alert and advise you about a significant change in the framework for the recording and learning from patient safety incidents. For those of us who've been in the NHS a long time, you probably remember some of the challenges around patient safety previously, and the current incident framework, which has been in existence since 2015, did do a lot around really the reporting and the learning from patient safety, but I think the time is right for a change in approach and how we do this from a cultural point of view. So it summarises the changes. There is a link to the framework for people to go if they want to read that. I do think it would be good to have some board training on this at one of our development sessions, really, to really put it out.
That's good.
And I think what the paper really brings out is, we've been very fortunate, again, really in Lancashire South Cumbria, is trying to bring out some of the real strengths we've got. So East Lancs Teaching Hospital was one of the early adopters of this framework, and they did it very well, and that was done in partnership with the NCCG, and I can see Abdul nodding that we're partners in that patch. And actually the fact that they were an early adopter and it was a success is a real strength for learning now across the other trusts. In addition, we've got Caroline, who's produced the paper for me, who's now the Associate Director of Patient Safety for the ICB, is really passionate and really switched on about this, which is another asset for us. So the paper's bringing out, we've made really rapid progress quite quickly. We're doing it with all the trusts and the independent sector and wider partners. So really it's just trying to highlight the progress we're making and the next steps. Quality Committee have had a report on this twice, and Quality Committee will continue to oversee our progress and implementation of the patient safety framework. And last thing for me is, and also as part of this, it isn't just about implementing the framework, we are really looking, Caroline and that working group are really looking, because it's something that was picked up earlier, around some whole system learning. One of the things, in lots of things, it's not just in patient safety, it's the same when we have safeguarding reviews, and we don't always, not always that great at sharing the learning right across the system. What often happens is we share the learning with a small group of staff who've been involved in an incident, not always very good. Doing it right across the partnership is really taking learning and trying to get it to change the way we do things going forward in a whole systematic way. So they are exploring how we use the new framework to do some wider whole system learning.
Thank you. Content to receive this report. Rely on the Quality Committee, Sheena, then to do as Sarah described. Well done, Sarah. We've touched through the course of our discussion this morning on a number of issues that emerged from the committee discussions. I'm still, as I've said, with the Finance and Performance Committee, still I need to do more work with the committee chairs about how we get the right business done in committees and the right business here. We have these alert, advise, assure letters, which are helpful and people can see there. Is there anything you need to highlight from the audit meeting, Jim?
Well, it's the words just used, really. The big concern in the audit committee is the lack of assurance we've got on a lot of things, basically. The AAA reports would be more helpful in terms of giving assurance to this through this forum, but that they need developing a little bit for some of the committees. So I think it's the assurance aspect, and it was interesting that the external auditors were slightly concerned when we had our last meeting that the state of certain systems and controls in terms of how they would review the position at the end of the year. So it felt like there was a lot of work to be done between when we had our last meeting, which was a month or so ago, and the end of the financial year.
Okay. Thank you. Take it. Sheena, anything you wanted to highlight?
Just to
particularly around the quality assurance and current crisis, that we had a very good discussion on that at our meeting, and also, as we've already said, we are coming alongside that patient safety in certain sport response new framework. I think it's a great opportunity to be much more open and to learn that continuous improvement. And then we'll see around the alert safety. I just wanted to demonstrate there's a lot of mitigation around that. So I think that's what I want to pick up. Thank you.
Thank you. Roy, anything you want to
I think we've discussed most of it, David, but just want to mention the continuing healthcare business case that we approved at that meeting, which was
well received. And David, noting that Kevin's already made a statement about Whitnall, anything you want to say on the price case?
It was just one thing that we did cancel, unfortunately, the dental deep dive. We're going to be picking up the commissioning of dental services in April, so that will come back to the primary care commissioning group, and it may need to come to a quality committee possibly, if we're going to pick up something where there are challenges.
Thank you. I've not been notified of any item, any other business. Kevin, anything else we need to raise? No. Thank you. Our next meeting will definitely be on Wednesday the 29th of March, and it will start at 9:30. We'll confirm very quickly the venue. I'm not sure that we're right on the venue at the moment, but we'll confirm that with you ASAP. Thank you all very much. I've stolen a lot of extra time. The discussions have been helpful. I apologise for overrunning the meeting. I'll close this meeting now. Board members will return for part 2 of our meeting, which I'll start your agreement at 12:45 and still be able to finish by 1:30.